Nicola Sturgeon vows to fully cooperate with investigators after her husband faced 11 hours of questioning by police.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock on Thursday, the 6th of April. This is Breakfast on GB News with Martin Daubney and Ellie Costello.
And here's what's leading the news this morning. Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, has been released pending further investigation into the SNP's finances after a day of questioning. A spokesperson for the former First Minister said she had no prior knowledge of the police's plans to arrest her husband.
The Prime Minister has defended plans to house migrants in a barge off the coast of Dorset, calling the proposal fair. Rishi Sunak said the three-deck vessel, called the Bibi Stockholm, could hold at least 500 people.
And nearly 100 Metropolitan Police officers have been moved from tackling serious crime to instead investigate wrongdoing within the force. In a letter to the Home Secretary, Commissioner Mark Rowley said there were hundreds of officers who shouldn't even be there.
And the Port of Dover will build temporary marquees to check passports as it moves to avoid another weekend of travel chaos. It comes as drivers are expect delays from today as 17 million cars hit the road over the Easter weekend.
And as ever, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us, of course, at gbnews. So to our top story this morning, the former chief executive of the SNP and husband of Nicola Sturgeon, Peter Murrell, has been released without charge after being detained for 11 hours by police.
Nicola Sturgeon has pledged to fully cooperate with investigators following the arrest yesterday morning, which saw officers seen taping off and searching the couple's Glasgow home.
So let's cross live now to Edinburgh, where we're joined by former advisor to the SNP as well as former SNP member, political commentator Stuart Crawford. So, Stuart, what do we know? Obviously, he's been released, but it doesn't look good, does it?
Good morning. No, it doesn't. As you can imagine, it's the only game in town north of Hadrian's Wall, certainly at the moment. And the only caveat I would make is that this is now a live proceeding in terms of the Contempt of Court Act 1981, and Scottish courts are particularly adept at and take that sort of thing very seriously. So we're slightly restricted in what we can say, and certainly we can't speculate. All I would say is that, for the SNP and to a certain extent for the wider Scottish independence movement as a whole, this has been a bit of a PR disaster and may set them back many years in their agenda. So much more to come, I think, and not really the place to speculate on anything too detailed about proceedings at the moment.
Yes, of course, we need to be really careful not to speculate. Of course, this is still a live investigation. The timing of this is very interesting, though, isn't there? And there are questions about how much the police knew and perhaps if they held off this arrest until after the SNP leadership contest came to a close. Do you think there could be some truth in that?
It's possible. The investigation, as far as I'm aware, started way back in July 2021. So it's been going for more than 18 months. And one could imagine what might have happened had this been carried out, police action been carried out before or during the SNP leadership election. I'm also interested to note that the normal process for replacing a leader of the party, of the SNP, is usually destined to take about 4.5 months. And in this case, it was truncated to nearer 4.5 weeks. So there are some interesting aspects to the investigation, and I've got no doubt that more detail will emerge in due course.
So, Stuart, how damaging do you think this is to not only to the chances of independence, but also to the SNP brand? I mean, we're already seeing dwindling membership. Do you think the Labour Party, for example, might be licking their lips north of the border?
Yes, indeed. Hamza Yousaf, who, as you know, was elected leader of the party and First Minister just recently, about a week ago, has really been left holding the baby on this one. And polling at the moment seems to indicate that the SNP will lose seats at the next Westminster election, and it holds 45 of the 59 Scottish seats at Westminster. And indeed, that may carry on to the next Holyrood elections for the Edinburgh Parliament in 2026. And the main beneficiary of that would appear to be, at the moment, the Labour Party. And I'm sure that Keir Starmer and the Scottish leader, Anas Sarwar, are indeed licking their lips and looking forward to a resurgence of Labour support north of the border.
And particularly difficult time ahead for Humza Yousaf. I mean, a brand new leader, and this is a challenging time now for the party.
Oh, indeed. I mean, it's a big job for him. It's not just this. This is just the latest worry that he has on his desk, together with all the inherited stuff to do with the ferries programme, which I think everybody's familiar with, the 2 ferries that are now 5 years late and 3 times over budget and still haven't appeared on the Hebridean routes, the deposit return scheme for cans and bottles, which has run into huge difficulties with both major and minor retailers, and a host of other things that are not going well in Scotland with the health service, education. The list is endless. So he has got a massive job on his hands, and it can't be. He can't be looking forward to quite a lot of it because it's going to be very difficult for him.
Well, Stuart Crawford, thank you very much for input this morning. It's been a nightmare start for Humza Yousaf, and choppy waters ahead, no doubt. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Now, Rishi Sunak has defended his plan to house up to 500 asylum seekers on a barge in Portland Harbour in Dorset, calling it fair. Yeah, it's part of the government's strategy to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in hotel accommodation, which currently costs the taxpayer up to £7 million every single day. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is the reporter at Politico, Stefan Boscher. Good morning to you. Really good to have you on the programme with us. So tell us what we know about the Bibi Stockholm, it's being called. It is this barge. We understand it can house up to 500 migrants. It's not very many, is it?
No, it's not, Ali, especially considering we have around 50,000 migrants, undocumented migrants, who are living in hotels around the country. And this policy is trying to solve that problem of trying to make it a much cheaper bill for the government, considering that a lot of these hotels that they're in cost, upwards of £100 a night, and it's a very expense for the government. But this idea of housing them all on barges, it creates quite a few problems for the government. I mean, firstly, they're trying to do it in Dorset, which is a very strong Conservative voting area. And even the local Tory MP, Richard Drax, doesn't want the barge there. And there are real concerns of having 500 people who can come and go from the barge being moored on a relatively small area. And I think that this is the sort of policy which might look like the government is doing something and tries to give the appearance of a government that is fresh with ideas, but it doesn't seem like it's really a long-term solution to what is quite a long and drawn-out and intractable problem.
Well, Stefan, there are 222 bedrooms on board, 506 asylum seekers, a cost of £20,000 a day. That works out about £50 a night. So at least it is cheaper than hotels. But one thing that's happening here is NIMBYism. We've seen Richard Drax doesn't want them off the shore of his constituency because, of course, it may affect the tourism industry. So this is just another sticking plaster, it feels like.
It is, and we've also seen similar attitudes from other Tory MPs, like people like James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, when there were suggestions that migrants could be placed in military bases. So I think that this is a really widespread issue throughout the Tory party of where do you actually place migrants, where MPs would be happy to have them, considering that this is the government's #1 priority, or near to the #1 priority. It's very easy for MPs and ministers to line up and say we 100% agree with the illegal immigration bill, which basically bans people from small boats coming over. But when it gets down to it, most of them won't want to actually solve the current backlog we have and house the migrants we have now in their own areas.
I wanted to ask you, Stefan, about another story that we're seeing this morning. It's a letter from Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And in this letter, he's revealed that almost 100 Metropolitan Police officers have been diverted from serious crime squads to focus on internal standards in a bid to root out colleagues that are deemed unfit for the job. Now, that is very concerning news to lots of people waking up this morning, that 100 of highly trained police officers in serious crime units are essentially being taken off the job.
crime rates are already through the roof in London. It's, a complete disaster what's happening here. And if you look at the, spike in violent crime and the spike in organised crime post-COVID, this is a serious worry. But, I do understand where the Met's coming from, in the sense that there are such deep and underlying problems in the force. We've had a recent review into them by the government, and it's found the Met to be institutionally racist and misogynist. And we've had instances of officers like Wayne Couzens and David Carrick committing the most serious of crimes. In one instance, murder; in another instance, sexual assault. So I understand the need to clean up the Met, but this seems like a very bizarre way to go about it when we already have serious problems with crime in the capital. I mean, a lot of areas are getting particularly dangerous and particularly, unruly for police to crack down on.
Stefan, there's another scandal this morning on the front page of The Times. This time, more cash for access. Trouble for the Conservatives. MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton, who's the chairman of the all-party parliamentary group on betting and gambling. What's happening there?
This is an absolutely disgraceful story, I'm not going to lie. I mean, Scott Benton, there's a video of it that everyone should watch on The Times. It is him being recorded by undercover reporters, and they're asking him very brazenly, if we pay you, will you go and lobby ministers for us? Will you try to get at the results that we want? And the reporters say that they are from the gambling industry and they represent people from the gambling industry. And Scott Benton very, openly and without any hint of subtlety at all, says that he's willing to, for money, go and try to change the wording of a bill to try to water down gambling laws. And this is the sort of thing that Rishi Sunak doesn't really need, and the Conservative Party has acted very quickly to suspend the party whip from Scott Benton. And I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't shown, if he isn't allowed back into the party, because for a party that has struggled with integrity and honesty issues over the last year, this is the last thing they need. And, I think that something like this shows that many MPs really are for sale on both sides of the ledger, that this isn't just Conservative Party problem.
Well, Stefan, he's already had the whip withdrawn, and this is a seat that only very recently went Conservative. It's historically been a Labour seat. There could be a danger of a by-election here, and if so, this could be a bellwether of the forthcoming general election. Tory HQ will be furious with this guy, won't they?
Absolutely. And, when Rishi Sunak became PM, he stood up at the front of Number 10 and said that his lodestar, his absolute base of being Prime Minister will be on integrity, will be on honesty, will be on professionalism. This does not project that. And for a party that's already so far behind in the polls, they really need to have, an almost perfect 18 months. They need to be free of scandal. They need to be free of anything that makes them look as if they're out of touch with the people. This has been a big problem already they've had after, the whole Boris Johnson fiasco and Liz Truss. So I think that it's especially damning coming up to these May local elections, where a lot of these red wall seats, these old northern, traditionally Labour areas which voted Brexit, they are up for election in the local elections in May. Scott Benton is in one of these seats. So I think that the Tories be very, very nervous that they could get a serious kicking at these elections by these areas they need to hold in the next election if they have any chance of forming government.
Okay, Stefan Boscher from Politico, thank you for your time this morning. A rollercoaster ride waits, not just in Blackpool, but the entire Tory party. Thanks for input today.
The time is 6:13. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories.
And the Home Secretary has been selected to be the Conservative candidate for a proposed new constituency, Fareham and Waterlooville. Suella Braverman faced fellow Hampshire MP Flick Drummond in a party vote over changes to the constituency's boundaries. She won by 77 votes to 54.
The government's approved a £48 million fund to make England's most dangerous roads safer. The money will go towards improving signage and road markings on 27 roads around the country, as well as reducing congestion and emissions. Allocations have been based on Road Safety Foundation data showing the number of people killed and traffic levels.
And millions of mobile phones across the UK will sound an alarm just like that this month in a new public alert test. The system's intended to be used in life-threatening situations, including flooding and wildfires. The message will be coming through at 3 p.m. on the 23rd of April, vibrating for up to 10 seconds, so look out for that.
Now, Now, Dover, the UK's busiest port, will build temporary marquees to check passports in an attempt to avoid a repeat of last weekend's travel chaos.
And that comes as 70 million people hit the roads this weekend for Easter getaways. Joining us now to discuss this further is travel expert Sally Gethin. So, Sally, every time you come in, there's bad news about...
No, I'm still smiling.
Yeah,
about how chaotic things are going to be. Let's start with the roads. We'll do planes, trains and automobiles. Let's start with the roads. 17 million. It's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
When are going to be the black spots?
So, yeah, 17 million extra journeys going to be made. That's about 25% above normal traffic levels. And it's going to be every day pretty much over the bank holiday. And the worst times to travel are usually after 10 o'clock, between 10, say, and 4 p.m. most days. And the general travel advice, and from, you know, the RAC and the AA, is to try and get away very early on Good Friday tomorrow, and if not, try and pick a totally different day outside the weekend. But obviously people will want to get away, and if the weather improves, that's going to spur people to get on the roads spontaneously as well.
Yeah.
So the motorways are going to be the longer journeys is where the congestion delays are likely to take place. There's warnings that particularly the favourite holiday spots, Cornwall, the southwest, for example. So the motorway system is going to be affected. The M4 is likely to face delays. The M6, the M25 obviously is often...
So all the places people need to go, basically.
Yeah. So the other thing that we're all watching to wait and see and keeping our fingers crossed is the Port of Dover. Now, they have been putting a crisis management plan together, and they're doing a few things. So one is setting up a big marquee, particularly to look after the larger coach parties, to provide more processing, passport checks, facilities. And also they're talking to the ferry operators to stagger those sailings across the weekend to avoid, you know, those peak log jams that they were getting. And they're also, you know, trying to work with the French authorities, because obviously it's not all the fault of the Port of Dover in that regard.
What about if you're flying out this weekend? How are the airports looking?
Yeah, so Heathrow's not looking too good because there's a big security worker strike there, particularly impacting Terminal 5. And actually, it's not so much at our airports in the UK, it's also when you travel. So at Portugal, there expect to be big problems. Their immigration staff are striking there, delays there. France is in disarray. The government is actually warning people to be very alert if they're travelling to France this weekend with the protests and so forth. French air traffic controllers are striking, which impacts all the short to medium haul routes over Europe. Ryanair has, for example, reported problems. And Spain also has there are ground staff striking in Spain at the airports.
OK, now finally, those who plan to use trains, like I'm meant to be going away on Saturday, haven't booked a ticket yet. You're about to tell me I'm being really silly, aren't you?
Depends which station you're going from.
I'm going from Paddington here and I'm going out west.
Paddington is not so bad, but for going north, Euston Station is completely closing over the bank holiday weekend.
That's the Manchester route, so that would be chaos.
Yes. Advice is to try and use St Pancras. South, Victoria Station, which is the gateway to the south east, for example. Southern services are all being diverted to London Bridge. Many platforms there closed. There's no Gatwick Express. So there's a few other problems, for example, at Marylebone Station and Charing Cross. There's some disruption with the Chilterns line as well. The advice is to check with your train operator, plan ahead if you can, and also use social media to update. The train operators are all using social media, Twitter particularly, and you can be double-checking that or follow them anyway, and also their own websites. And worst-case scenario, keep all your receipts. Most train operators offer some form of delay compensation.
And Sally, just very briefly, if somebody is listening to this and thinking, oh, it's carnage out there, when is the best time this weekend to try and get away?
Yeah, so it depends which mode of travel you're using, and obviously if you're committed, then you have to take that flight or whatever it is. But definitely try and get away before 10 o'clock tomorrow if you are going to hit the roads. And Sunday and Saturday could be quieter. Sunday, and that's the day when people want to see family members, Easter Day, and so there could be a lot of people going for shorter journeys on that day as well. So you really do need to keep up to date with your roads and the latest traffic alerts.
Okay, Sally Gethin, thanks for your input. It's all enough to make you stay at home and eat Easter eggs and just gorge on chocolate, isn't it? Thank you for your input today.
That's the best. Thanks,
Okay,
Sally.
you're welcome.
Set your alarms. You need to be on the road before 10 o'clock tomorrow. That's going to be the answer, isn't it? Now, coming up, do you have a will? As new research shows that half of British adults don't. We'll find out why it's important, even if you don't think you have anything worth giving away. And you're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 6:22. Still lots to come on today's programme. As the government announces almost £50 million for the country's most unsafe roads, at 6:45 we'll ask, is this enough? A new Channel 4 show will feature adults stripping off in front of 14 to 16-year-olds to, they say, champion differences and break down stereotypes. We'll be debating this at 7:20. We'll be debating whether nudity has become too normalised. And please get in touch all the usual ways, especially on that one, because that really got people going last night. That did. It really divided the nation. Get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Of course, tweet us at GBNews. Also, let us know if you're getting away over the Easter weekend. If so, how are you doing so? How are you feeling? If you're heading through Dover, are you feeling nervous? I would be. After those 17-hour queues last weekend. We'll just stay at home and eat all your Easter eggs. It's starting to feel like one of them. Yeah, how are you feeling about the rails? I was feeling OK until we just did that report. And now I'm getting a little bit squeaky bum. I just need to plan ahead more. That's my problem, Ellie. Yeah, we were just saying when Sally Gethin comes in, it's always chaos, isn't it? So, but anyway, the best advice is set off early, check your journey in advance, and do check on social media if you're going by rail or plane, because they will update you. But it could be chaos out there this weekend. GBViews at gbnews.uk. OK, so last year, the Wanted singer Tom Parker sadly died without writing a will when he lost his 18-month battle with brain cancer. And he's not alone. New research shows half of us admit to not making a will, with many of us thinking we don't have enough money to create one. So when is a good time to make a will?
Well, joining us now to discuss this further is wills and trust lawyer Gary Rycroft. Hello there, Gary. So it's one of those things that people just don't like to think about, isn't it? And I guess that's the root of the problem, isn't it?
Well, as you were just saying about travelling, I think you need to plan early, plan your route and set off early with making a will.
Well, that was short and to the point.
Yeah.
So how do people best go about it? I guess yesterday we were talking about getting a divorce online. Is the easiest way now just to go online and just crack on with it that way? And how much does it cost for a typical sort of cheap and cheerful will, as it were?
Well, I'm not a fan of cheap and cheerful wills, to be honest, and I'm not a fan of making them online because I think actually it's a really important thing. It's a really important thing for your loved ones to show that you have thought about them enough to make a will. And so actually investing a short amount of time, it possibly takes an hour of your life to make a will, and investing a small amount of money, it might be £200 or £300, is a very kind thing to do to your loved ones, to actually show that you've thought about them enough to get everything in order and to make sure that your assets, whatever they may be, big or small, are going to pass on to the right people.
Yes, I wanted to pick you up on that because I think many people don't write a will because they feel like they're too young and they don't have anything of worth to give away. Is that what puts a lot of people off, do you feel?
I think that's a very good point. And, you know, anyone that's aged 18 or over with the requisite mental capacity can make a will. But in the real world, when you turn 18, you don't celebrate by making a will. What is a trigger for making a will is life events. It's maybe moving in with someone, it's acquiring your first home, it's getting married, it's getting divorced, it's having children. So as we get older, people think about making a will. And of course, that's about the fact that we know that if you're younger, you're less likely to die. As we get older, we're more likely to die. We all know that innately. So in effect, young people not making a will are betting against dying. But as we've sadly seen from Tom Parker, that bet doesn't always work out.
And Gary, of course, there are severe pitfalls to not having a will. For example, if you pass away, what happens then? Your assets are frozen until the state deals with it, and that can risk your loved ones not getting hold of your assets sooner. What are the pitfalls of not being prepared?
If you don't have a valid will, the law dictates what should happen to your estate, as we lawyers call it, and those rules are called the intestacy rules. Now, the main thing for viewers to understand about the intestacy rules is that they favour spouses, as in Tom Parker's wife, and children. So the main issue for people not making a will is particularly for those who are in a relationship where they're not married. If you are married, your estate may well pass to your spouse, but that is subject to a financial limit of £270,000. So the intestacy rules say that your spouse or civil partner will receive the first £270,000. After that, it's split between your spouse or civil partner and your children, if you have children. So not making a will, again, is meaning you're losing control of what's going to happen to your estate, again, whether it's big or small.
And Gary, what would your advice be then to people who are watching and listening at home today and thinking, oh, I haven't made a will yet? How do they go about doing so?
Well, I really understand the point you made that in the cost of living crisis, it's not going to be the top of people's list. But I do implore people, if you have loved ones, think about making a small investment with regard to making a will. It's a small investment of time and money. Look for a solicitor in your local area, use the Law Society, find a solicitor tool, and sometimes charities will have situations where they will, in effect, sponsor you making a will for a small donation to their charity. So look out for those charity will offers.
OK, that's superb advice. Thank you, Gary Rycroft, for helping us with that this morning. Thank you.
Let us know what you make of that. Have you written a will? Is it something that you've thought about? Perhaps you consider yourself too young. Perhaps you think you haven't got enough worth to give away. I mean, it's certainly things that are putting people off. Have you got a will?
I have got a will, and I was badgered into it by my father-in-law.
Oh, really?
He said, look, you have to do it. And I was like, oh, my God, I'm not going to die. You like to think I'm young. I'm not as young as I was.
That's it.
But I actually felt really relieved after I'd done it. And it was only about 400 quid. But I now know that my children are going to be safe. Yeah. And if I roll over and croak now, they're sorted. The peace of mind, I found really liberating to do it.
See, I haven't got a will. I don't think I've got anything
You're
giving away.
You're a whippersnapper.
But I remember my mum telling me a couple of years ago that she'd written a will, and I was like, don't say that. It's awful to think of. You don't want to think about it, do you? But
That's
you're
right.
right. I think as a parent,
yeah,
it's different because you want to know that everyone's provided for. But let us know what you make of that. Half of British people don't have a will written yet. It's quite a shocking statistic. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But stay with us. We're going to be discussing the Tory MP Scott Benton, who's been suspended from the party in a lobbying scandal. We're going to find out more about that story with Amy Cameron and Andy Jones. That's next.
And this is Breakfast on GB News with Martin and Ellie.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. It's 6:32, and let's bring you up to date with all of this morning's front pages now.
And the Telegraph focuses on the police raid on Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, who was arrested yesterday as part of an investigation into party donations.
The Times leads with a scandalous investigation into Tory MP Scott Benton, who has been suspended from the Conservative Party in a cash for access scandal about gambling.
The Sun go with argy-bargy as the facilities on Britain's first migrant floating hotel are revealed.
And The Guardian revealed the royal family took £1.2 billion in private income from their various estates.
Well, it's time to go through the papers in more detail now with writer and journalist Andy Jones and environmental campaigner Amy Cameron. Really good to have you both with us this morning. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Hi.
Andy, let's start with you. It's a big story, isn't it? Nicola Sturgeon's husband being arrested yesterday. This is in the Mail.
Yeah.
It's on many of the papers.
This is absolutely everywhere. And we had this incredible, almost line-of-duty TV show scenes of a blue tent erected outside Nicola Sturgeon's house. And the conversation now is, what did they know and when? And so Nicola Sturgeon's husband was arrested yesterday. This is, let's give you some background, this is to do with the handling of around 600,000 in donations to their political party, of which £100,000 he then loaned back in order to keep the cash flow going through the party, as I understand it. But Nicola Sturgeon, who interestingly was out on a driving lesson when police swooped on her house yesterday, I don't know whether she did a big handbrake turn in the road to pedal back again. The big question is now, did they delay this police investigation until Nicola Sturgeon had gracefully departed the SNP scene. Did they know about this months ago? Has there been any wheeler dealing to enable sort of the succession of Hamza Yousaf? And what is going to happen now? Alex Neil, former Health Secretary, has said, what did they know and when? And that's basically the thrust of much of what we're seeing in the paper.
And of course, we can't speculate too much. The SNP are very litigious, and of course, the full facts aren't ahead of us yet. Of course, Sturgeon essentially didn't know anything about it, and that's the line we're going with for now. Amy.
Yes.
As a Scot.
As the token Scot.
What do you
First
make?
of all, furious that Andy took this story.
Yeah.
As the Scot on the panel, Andy.
What do you make of not just of this story, but more broadly speaking, what's going on in Scotland at the moment? There seems to be just chaos around the gender recognition bill, the new election of Hamza Yousaf, and now this plunging membership. Is independence a dying dream?
Yeah, this is such an interesting story and has been such a kind of fascinating and quite disheartening thing to watch over the last couple of months, right? Because this is coming off the back of a series of sort of scandals and chaos that's engulfed the SNP laterally. I think what you're seeing to some extent is the same thing you see in the Conservative Party, which is that time is the killer for all political parties, and it's the one thing they can't outpace. Nicola Sturgeon, whatever you thought of her politics, was an extremely competent leader, and I think it's fair to say that through her sort of force of will and personality and her own personal popularity, she had been papering over the cracks in the SNP, which had actually been quite visible to those within the party for quite some time. In terms of the link to independence, for sure this is a knock. We saw record highs for support for independence not that long ago. The worse the Tory party are, the better the independence cause does. However, we have seen that fall back again in light of both I think partly in light of a resurging Labour Party. So speaking from my own personal position, my entire family voted no for the independence referendum when it happened in 2014. And I would say that had you asked me, last year, purely a heart-based decision, myself or my family who are based in Scotland, would you have voted independence? We would have said yes. Not necessarily super logically, but because as left-wingers based in Scotland, people have become increasingly disheartened and disenfranchised from the wider Westminster political circus. So I think that the two are definitely linked. What's interesting now, I think, is that the SNP have lost their sort of stranglehold, if you will, on independent voters. They are now looking for other homes.
Let's quickly go back to you on that, Andy. So politically looking ahead, you've got to have people like Keir Starmer licking their lips about this chaos.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Labour were desecrated in Scotland in recent elections, weren't they? And this is a chance to make ground. And it shows you how bad the SNP have been doing, that despite all of the chaos in Westminster, despite almost everybody being universally sick of what's going on in the current regime, they are still in a big mess, and they're failing particularly badly on things like health in Scotland. And Labour will see this as another opportunity to make ground.
Yeah, I think you can't move in Scotland for falling over Labour MPs at the moment and ministers. They're now projected to take 10 seats. I think it is worth pointing out, though, that's from the SNP have 57 seats in Scotland. So they're coming down from a phenomenal position of power. So it's an interesting story. We'll see how it develops.
And it's going to roll, and Hamza Yousaf has got a big challenge ahead of him, doesn't he?
I think worth flagging that he was released last night without charge, which was released late last night without charge.
Amy, let's stay with you, shall we? And we're looking at a Westminster scandal. This is Scott Benton, Tory MP. This is in the Times. Tell us a bit more about this.
Astonishing.
Gambling cash for access.
Yeah, so, I mean, this story is just really appalling, although, frankly, not that surprising, because it comes in the wake of a number of similar stories about cash for access, cash for questions, cash for influence. This specific story is Scott Benton. He is the Blackpool South MP. He is one of the kind of 2019 red wall intake and seats, which were historically always Labour. I think this story will come as no surprise to those who know him in his local constituency. Worth pointing out that his own Conservative council members signed a statement of no confidence for him back in February. So clearly close to home, people have identified his incompetence. The story itself is about a meeting that he took with Times journalists, a sting operation, who were claiming to be representing the gambling industry with with which Scott Benton is very closely associated, an industry which I think, as we all know, causes untold damage to people
and it's
across the UK.
awash with money as well,
Absolutely.
and a lot of Chinese money. Yep.
Yes, awash with money, lots of which they lavish on MPs in kind of hospitality. But this was Scott Benton offering, I mean, quite staggering levels of access and influence. So he was offering to leak white papers, he was offering to put forward questions, he was offering to quite literally station himself outside of ministers' offices to grab their attention for, and I think it's fair to say, not a tiny amount of money, but this isn't the sort of... Do you remember a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago, I lose track of the Tory sleaze scandals, Hancock and the like were offering themselves for £10,000 a day.
Led by donkeys did that.
Exactly. Scott Benton, on the other hand, is offering to do this for £2,000 to £4,000 for 2 days a month work, I think. Not small sums of money. But given that we're talking about MPs who are already being paid, what, something in the realm of 85k, I think, 84? Why do they feel this sort of grubby need to sell themselves and debase our whole democracy for these sums of cash? I think it's
because
super
cash
gross.
is king, and they want to bring you in here. This is going to be carnage for the Tories because you're absolutely right, Amy. This is the seat that went Conservative after a long history of being Labour, like many of those red wall seats. This could be a bellwether for what's going to happen to the Conservative Party, and the Tory CCHQ must be livid.
They must be absolutely fuming. I mean, Benson's released the lamest of lame statements talking about clarifying his communications, and when he realised he'd broken the rules, he swiftly backtracked. But we all know in the media that these gambling companies have huge sums of money, and it just shows how cheap this guy is that he's prepared to do this for £2,000 a month or whatever it was. Gambling companies, of course, are in the crosshairs at the moment because of driving problem gamblers to the point of suicide, all sorts of dreadful practices of flying problem gamblers to casinos and all sorts of places. And for Benson to be involved in this, as you say, for such low sums of money and so banged to rights, it appears, if what the Sun said is true, they'll be tearing their hair out.
Certainly one to watch. I mean, we could be seeing the triggering of a no confidence vote and perhaps a by-election. So let's move on, shall we, to the next story.
Andy, this is a story on the Express, as it is in many of the papers. This is the Migrant barge that we're talking about this morning. Apparently, Rishi Sunak says it's fair and it's going to save money.
It is. This is 500 asylum seekers, all male, are going to be put on a barge called the Bippy Stockholm. Bippy Stockholm sounds like a sort of Eurovision contest, doesn't it? Contestant. But 500 men off the coast of Dorset are going to be positioned in this barge, so it's a substantial vessel. And this is based on the idea that they want to remove the issue of asylum seekers from communities. So Suella Braverman's been charged with this idea that she's dumping the problem of asylum seekers, large groups of men being dumped in hotels, in people's constituencies, in people's communities, and we've seen the issues that have been happening in the northwest a few weeks ago where there were protests and all sorts of things. The idea is that almost out of sight, out of mind, putting them off the coast will resolve that. In terms of cost, they're looking at sort of £50 a day to house these individuals, which maths fans is about 25 grand a day for the whole vessel.
It's cheaper than hotels. There is that, at least, in its favour.
Yeah, and there's around, looking at those hotels again, there's around 51,000 asylum seekers currently stationed at 395 different sites, which is costing £6 million a day. I've got sort of concerns about 500 men on a barge off Dorset. I don't know what the security detail is going to be on that. I mean, that's almost the size of a Navy vessel, isn't it, 500 people?
Well, Richard Drax, the Tory MP, said almost exactly that. He said it's like a part-time prison. You're letting 500 young men in a part-time prison and then you're allowing them into a community. And he said that's a risk. That's a risk in itself.
Yeah, I don't know what qualifies these in particular men going on this barge. I don't know whether there's a significant security risk about these gentlemen. Obviously, that's my personal speculation, nothing I've read in the papers. But it's an interesting sort of position, isn't it, having 500 men on one boat? But Rishi Sunak's under huge pressure to remove the issue of these in the communities. We've had all these sort of flashpoints, and the more flashpoints that occur...
Just want to bring Amy in here. I can hear you grinding your teeth to a powder to my left here. Obviously, there has been a previous... This was previously used, by the way, in the Netherlands, this same vessel, and it's had a refit since then, but there was a big backlash about the inhumane conditions on board. I'm assuming you think this is a bad idea.
I think fundamentally, the thing everyone can agree on is that our system for processing refugees in the UK is completely broken. There are 160,000 people in the backlog. That fundamentally is what is driving up the cost. So the number of men on this barge will be 0.003% of the backlog.
And it's actually about 1 day's worth of arrivals in peak summer.
So this is not about addressing the backlog. This is not about channel crossings. This is purely about driving headlines, clickbaity information from a government which has literally nothing else to stand on. I fundamentally don't believe this government has any interest in addressing the current crisis in our refugee system.
But to counter that, the Labour Party have no interest in tackling this issue at all. So at least they're doing something, right?
I'm not a huge fan of the Labour Party's position on this either. Fundamentally, what we need to do is process people. If people have a legitimate right to be in the UK, then they should be allowed to enter communities and work. If they don't have a legitimate right to be in the UK, then they should be returned to their country of origin. Keeping 160,000 people in a backlog is inhumane and gets more inhumane with every move. It also costs a phenomenal amount. It's completely illogical. But the Tories are trying to hold together an incredibly precarious constitution of voters, right? Constituency of voters, rather, as well as a party which is deeply divided on immigration. So right now in the UK, immigration figures are higher than they've been for years because we're bringing in workers and students. The Tories don't want us to talk about that because that's what many voters were concerned about previously. So they'd much rather dangle desperate people in desperate conditions as a distraction from their own incompetence, whether that's on the economy, the NHS or anything else. I fundamentally don't believe they've got any interest in solving this. It's such a useful device for them to use desperate people to distract from their own failure across pretty much every other item.
Apart from that, you're a huge fan of the Tories.
Yes, apart from that, obviously, they've got my support in the next election.
But what is so interesting about this story is we're seeing Tory MPs being critical of this barge and the placement of its barge.
Yes.
These Tory MPs who want us to tackle the illegal migration crisis, who want us to ramp down on those numbers, but they don't want us to tackle it in their constituencies and on their patch.
No. But one of the other issues which Amy was saying, just to extend that, is we're short of workers in lots of these things. And there's this huge delay in getting people who could become workers for Britain into communities. And also, obviously, one of the issues of the asylum problem is integration with communities is one of the big issues, where you end up with sort of areas that are completely sort of areas that aren't necessarily embedded into British culture, and sticking a load of blokes on a barge isn't necessarily going to do much for their sort of integration.
Surely the answer isn't to give working permits to asylum seekers without even knowing who they are.
No, quite right. But the issue, as I said, as what Amy was saying, is that there isn't a process now. I mean, there's a further article in the papers today about the Passport Office basically giving up on processing so many claims for British people exiting and entering the country. And so we're in this position now where there isn't an asylum system. And the problem is that you can't get in legally. And so we're getting small boats. And then, again, we're kicking the problem into the long grass because are we even processing these people, or are we just going to leave them on a barge?
Well, it's a huge thought that won't go away, and just get in touch with that. And if you've got your views out, I'm sure you have GB views at gbnews.uk. Amy, shall we move on? What have we got next?
Yes, Sabina Ness's sister has urged Dominic Raab to stop killers snubbing sentence hearings. This is in the Mirror.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I never fail to be amazed by this strength and dignity of the families of people who have been killed. You know, their ability to try to gain something better for other people in the wake of such horrible tragedies it always astounds me. You know, these people are so articulate, so compassionate. Yeah. This is a story, it follows a number of cases. So Olivia Pratt-Corbell, Sabina Nessa, Zara Alina, all of where the men who've gone on to be convicted of their murders have refused to appear in court. And I think rightly the families of these victims have said that they want to be able to look these men in the eye when they give their witness impacts, their family impact statements. I think that's totally understandable, and anyone would think that was reasonable. I guess my only caveat is how do we do this? If these men do not want to appear in court, what we also don't want to see is scenes of disruption. You know, if a man is being sort of manhandled in and is disrupting a court case, that's clearly going to be traumatic. This is not an argument for or against. against. I just recognise there are some practical implications. I heard someone on the radio yesterday saying a sort of midway option might be that at the very least they can be streamed live from a prison where they can be held more appropriately. And I do think, increasing sentences or incentivising them in that way, disincentivising them, I guess, would be more accurate.
Well, Andy, can I bring you in here just to get your view? Because I'm staggered, actually, and I think a lot of people are, that people have the right to not face the music, as it were, in this case. And earlier in the week, we had a guest on, a lawyer, who was saying they are going to look at reviewing this. And surely, as you said, Amy, families deserve their moment to look this person in the eye and have that closure so they can move on too. Why are we having a system that protects the perpetrators and not the victims?
Absolutely. We're in a position... Anyone who's ever done court reporting knows that so much of the way that the court exists is to show justice being done. Public galleries so people can see justice being done. Reporters at every court hearing across the country, in open court, justice being seen to be done. And why aren't... if we can't physically drag them up into court, why can't we stream them live from their cells? Not broadcasted on live TV, but just for the basis of the court, so they can see the reaction to the verdict and see justice being done. Yeah. We had this ridiculous situation where Thomas Cashman, the guy who was found guilty of Olivia Pratt-Bell's murder, said he wasn't coming out because he heard the prosecution singing hurty songs about him when they got their guilty verdict. Yeah. And you think, well, why are we kowtowing to these people's feelings? You can film people being arrested. You can film, doors being kicked in when these bad guys are caught and all sorts of things. CCTV of them, in the acts of committing these crimes. The idea that they don't have to face justice in court is absolutely absurd. And it seems what was so annoying is it seems to me that all political parties broadly agree with. There's not anyone saying, oh, well, actually, I think they should have the opportunity not to turn up. And yet there is nothing done about it. I think that's so frustrating about politics at the moment, that things we all agree with broadly, still nothing being done about it.
I think many people are surprised that was even the case.
Yeah,
that criminals were even allowed to say.
Yeah.
I mean, shocking. Right, I'm afraid that's it for that one. We've run out of time. Andy, Amy, really good to have you with us, and you're with us in the next hour as well. We've got lots more stories to go through.
Yeah, that was a rip-roaring romp through the papers. Thank you very much. Look forward to the next hour.
Now the time is 6:51. Let's bring you up to date with today's top stories.
And Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, has been released without charge pending further investigation. The former SNP chief executive was arrested as part of a probe into party finances. Ms Sturgeon insists she had no prior knowledge of police plans and says she'll fully cooperate with any investigation.
The Met Police are making moves to clean up its workforce, weeding out those who shouldn't be in the job. That's in a letter to the government from Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley, who says the Met has diverted 90 officers from tackling serious crime to instead investigate those within the force.
And cancer patients will now gain access to a drug which could benefit hundreds with breast cancer and prostate cancer. The NHS approved the drug olaparib, which prevents cancerous cells from repairing their DNA, causing them to die.
Now, the government's National Infrastructure Commission has warned dozens of major roads across England are so congested and in need of upgrading that they may damage economic growth.
Yeah, the Commission says the Treasury needs to refocus investment on road building, as for many people and businesses, it's the only viable transport option available.
Well, joining us now to discuss this further is motoring journalist and transport campaigner Quentin Wilson. Good morning to you, Quentin. Really good to have your company this morning. I mean, for anybody who takes a trip out on the roads in the UK, this will come as no surprise that roads are so damaged and so congested that it's actually, now we're hearing, risking our economic growth as a country.
But we've known this for years, and as long as I've been writing and broadcasting about cars, I've been saying that this culture of hating the car, four wheels bad, two wheels good, and not building roads deliberately will have these consequences. And here we are. And what's the backlog to repair the roads if we started now? It would take 11 years and cost 14 billion quid. How has it come to this? And I'll tell you how it's come to this, because back in 97, when New Labour came to power, they just cancelled a huge raft of road building projects. And this kind of ideological hatred of the car and anti-car rhetoric seeped into government in Westminster. And it's been there ever since. So the car was seen as this evil, and there was going to be this miraculous modal shift to public transport and active travel. Well, that hasn't happened. And, suddenly we wake up blinking in the headlights, if you'll pardon the pun, of the fact that our road system is a smoking, broken ruin, and it is affecting growth and GDP and productivity. And these headlines about how many hours a year we spend in traffic jams, this we could have seen. If you look back in history, you look at Eisenhower and the interstates of the 1950s, that laid the foundations of prosperous post-war America. But no, we don't want that. We want everybody to go to Tesco in the rain on their bicycles and travel on a public transport system that really doesn't exist and doesn't work.
Quentin, I was out with Howard Cox yesterday from Fair Fuel UK. You'll know him. And he was talking about this huge war, as you just mentioned. Where's it going to end? Because we have ULEZ schemes, we have clean air schemes. They can find millions of pounds for cycle lanes. Is this indicative of a political class who basically live in metropolitan areas and don't have to drive anywhere? And is it just actually a complete and utter all-out war on motorists now?
I call the Department for Transport the Department for Trains, because there is this absolute obsession with trains. We don't know why, but they are obsessed with them. And the money we have spent on the doomed HS2 project, if we'd spent just a tiny proportion of that, and I remember writing about this in the Mirror, we would have a much, much better strategic road network and A-roads. And you look at smart motorways. 2 people have recently died again on these smart motorways, which were a way of building new road capacity on the cheap. Now, this has just got to stop. Otherwise, we will have no growth in our economy, because people will not be able to transport goods and people from A to B. It's as simple as that.
Quentin, we haven't got very long with you, but I did want to ask you about the government's new £50 million package to improve Britain's roads. It's not a lot of money, is it?
It is a raindrop echoing in an ocean. When, the headline figure I gave you a minute ago, £14 billion just to fix the potholes. So we're talking about tinkering around the edges as usual. So, and this isn't just, one party. I'm not knocking the Conservative. It's Lib Dems, it's Labour. Everybody's had a hand in this mismanagement of our transport network.
Quentin Wilson, you're always a pleasure, never a chore. Thanks for your fiery words this morning. Thanks for joining us on GB News. OK, well, stay with us. We'll have more on that arrest and release of Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell.
But first, here's your forecast with Greg Dewhurst.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We'll see some heavy showers across the UK through the day ahead. There will be some sunny spells over the next few days, temperatures on the rise. So low pressure in charge of our weather at the moment, but this starts to slip away into Good Friday and the Easter weekend, and it allows high pressure to build and settle things down. Generally, however, weather fronts will try and move in, particularly as we get to Monday. So heavy showers already from the word go this morning across northern parts of England, across into Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, generally dry start with some sunny spells. But as we move through the day, increasing risk of some heavy thundery showers across parts of Wales, the Midlands, central southern England. Elsewhere, we'll generally see sunny spells. Rain holding on, though, across Shetland and Orkney as we move into the afternoon. In any sunny spells, we should see highs of around 15 or 16 Celsius, so feeling a little warmer than it did on Wednesday. Into the evening time, we could see those showers merge into some longer spells of rain, particularly down eastern parts of England. But elsewhere, we'll see clearing skies, and that will allow temperatures to drop away as we head overnight. Temperatures parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland falling close to, if not below freezing, leading to a patchy frost here, just holding up across the far southeast where we have thicker cloud and some patchy rain. It means a chilly start to Friday morning, but plenty of blue skies, with the exception being just the east coast of England and also far northeast of Scotland. Here we could see some low cloud lingering through the day, perhaps thick enough for the odd spot of light rain or drizzle. So feeling quite cool here, but elsewhere in the sunshine into the afternoon, a warm feeling day, 16 or 17 Celsius in that sunshine, making it feel pretty pleasant for the time of year. This warm, dry weather holds on through Saturday and into Sunday. Plenty of sunshine, but it does turn cooler and more unsettled as we head into Easter Monday. Those temperatures just dropping a little to around average for the time of year.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nicola Sturgeon vows to fully cooperate with investigators after her husband faced 11 hours of questioning by police yesterday.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Thursday the 6th of April. This is Breakfast on GB News with Martin Daubney and Ellie Costello.
Here's what's leading the news this morning.
Nicola Sturgeon's husband Peter Murrell has been released pending further investigation into the SNP's finances after a day of questioning. A spokesperson for the former First Minister said she had no prior knowledge of the police's plans to arrest her husband.
The Prime Minister has defended the move to house migrants in a barge off the coast of Dorset, calling the proposal fair. Rishi Sunak said the three-deck vessel, called the Bibby Stockholm, could hold at least 500 people.
And nearly 100 Metropolitan Police officers have been moved from tackling serious crime to instead investigate wrongdoing within the force. In a letter to the Home Secretary, Commissioner Mark Rowley said there were hundreds of officers who shouldn't even be there.
And the Port of Dover will build temporary marquees to check passports as it moves to avoid another weekend of travel chaos. It comes as drivers are warned to expect delays from today as 17 million cars hit the road over the Easter weekend.
And as usual, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or, of course, tweet us @gbnews.
To our top story now, and the former chief executive of the SNP and husband of Nicola Sturgeon, Peter Murrell, has been released without charge after being detained for 11 hours by police yesterday.
And Sturgeon has pledged to fully cooperate with investigators following the arrest yesterday morning, which saw officers seen taping off and searching the couple's Glasgow home and garden.
Well, let's go now to Glasgow, where we can talk to our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Good morning to you, Tony. What's the latest?
Morning. It's been what an incredible development in the SNP story. Certainly this is going to be one of the real defining moments in the first week of First Minister Humza Yousaf's initial week. Now, yesterday, as you said, Peter Murrell, 11 hours he underwent police questioning while police entered his home here in Glasgow behind me, and also the SNP HQ in Edinburgh. Now, in Edinburgh, police were seen exiting the building with dozens of boxes loading into a police van, and last night here another white van was underneath that blue tent behind me, again leaving with evidence. Wasn't quite sure today whether everything would be here. Obviously last night Peter Murrell released from police custody without charge, but Police Scotland reminding everyone that this is still an active investigation and therefore contempt of court still applies. Now, quite a lot of comment obviously yesterday from across the political spectrum, but if we could just even look at Humza Yousaf, who obviously this was his first week. It's what a roller coaster of a 2 months he's had, and certainly he made clear that, you know, he hasn't had a party role in finance before, and that certainly he will totally bring a new edge, you know, moving quite far away from this idea of being a continuity candidate. So yeah, lots of developments here, and this update coming soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Tony Maguire, our Scotland reporter. As you say, just 1 week into Humza Yousaf's new job. It's a big challenge for him. Thank you very much for bringing us that update, Tony.
Yeah, let's cross live now to Edinburgh, where we're joined by former advisor to the SNP, as well as a former SNP member, political commentator Stuart Crawford. Stuart Crawford, as first weeks at work go, this has been a nightmare for the SNP leader. What does this mean, though, for the future of independence in Scotland?
Good morning. I think that we can probably safely say that the independence movement north of the border has now stalled, because not only do we have the adverse public relations disaster, which is the arrest and release of Peter Murrell, but we also have the fact that Westminster will not in any way condone or grant the means whereby a legally and constitutionally binding independence referendum can be held. So the SNP and the wider independence movement is stuck between a rock and a hard place. There is no route forward that anybody can discern at the moment, and it puts the independence movement back several years, I would think.
And of course, questions this morning about the timing of all of this. It does seem to be very interesting. There will be questions of Police Scotland about what did they know and when. Obviously, this arrest coming just yesterday, just 1 week after Humza Yousaf becomes the new leader of the SNP.
Yes, indeed. I think we have to be slightly careful what we say here, given that this is now a live investigation. But one does wonder what the effect on the SNP leadership election might have been if this had happened either before or during that election process. And it certainly is added to new First Minister Humza Yousaf's woes in the first few days of his administration.
OK, Stuart Crawford, thank you for that update. It's certainly one to watch. Chaos north of the border. Thanks for joining us this morning from Edinburgh.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, Rishi Sunak has defended his plan to house up to 500 asylum seekers on a barge in Portland Harbour in Dorset. He's calling it fair.
And it's part of the government's strategy to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in hotel accommodation, which currently costs the taxpayer up to £7 million every single day.
Well, joining us now to discuss this further is human rights lawyer Harjit Singh Bangal. Good morning to you, Harjit. Really good to have you on the programme with us. So what do you make of this decision, then, to house migrants on the Bibby Stock home?
Yeah, I think once again, it's a bit more like theatrics. Too little, too late, probably, I would suggest. It's an attempt to clear up a mess that's been made by the government. The key is the backlog that's the government have failed to deal with. 500 is less than 0.5% of the government backlog. And remember, this barge is not instead of hotels. This is in addition to hotels. And as people have pointed out, we had 500 people crossing just this weekend. So just a weekend's crossings would fill this barge up. And then what? How many barges are we going to have? Are we going to surround the UK with barges? And it's just going to have communities up in arms. And we've already seen that this community in Dorset is already opposing this. The MP's opposing this. The residents are opposing this. There's fear that the people will just run out into the community and go to places nearby, like Bournemouth, etc. And they won't be traced. So it doesn't seem like a long-term solution. It's more deterrent tactics. And we'll wait and see if it actually works or not.
Well, Harjab, in its defence, it is significantly cheaper than hotels. There are 222 bedrooms on board, 506 asylum seekers. It works out about 40 or 50 quid a night.
Yeah.
However, the same vessel was used in the Netherlands, and there was a backlash about the cramped and inhumane conditions on board. Do you expect a similar thing to happen over here?
I think there will be a backlash, but once again, we haven't actually seen the inside of the conditions. More importantly, what happens if somebody falls off the barge and loses their life and drowns? Security risks with a barge when you've got a barge, and what are we going to do? There'll be national scandals. There'll be inquiries held. So I think from that point of view, there needs to be concerns. But I think the backlash mainly is going to be that there isn't enough barges. The one barge is not going to cut it. I mean, how are you going to deter 50,000 people from crossing, or an estimated 80,000 this year from crossing, by just saying we've got a barge for 500 people? And once again, it's similarly like the Rwanda thing. If you've only got space for 200 people, or say even 400 people, we know it's 200 at the moment, that doesn't deter 50,000 people. And the root of the problem is the actual gangs. The gangs' job is to land people in the UK. The barges won't deter the gangs. Rwanda hasn't deterred the gangs we've seen. There's been no actual comment about getting these gangs. It's like I always say, and I've said it many times here, it's akin to locking up drug users and hoping that drug dealing stops. And that's the same thing, locking up the end user, hoping that the people smugglers will stop. And I'm afraid it just won't deter people smugglers.
I mean, another question will be, where do we dock these barges? Because Portland Harbour is a private port. It means that the government doesn't need to seek planning permission. But Richard Drax, the Tory MP, has already warned they are going to get a shock when this goes wrong. He says it will go wrong. His fear is that this is a quasi-prison, and these men who are in this part-time prison will be allowed to walk around the port. Has he got a point?
Yeah, I think he's right, because immigration detention is very different to people going to jail. So immigration detention has an element of freedom, has an element of facilities. So while people are detained as such, it's not, say, a Category A prison. So people will be allowed to walk around. They will be possibly tagged, but there will be an element of freedom there. And if the Conservatives' own MPs are opposing it, then I think that's wise to listen to them. Usually Conservative MPs would end up backing a plan like this. But when their own MPs start to rebel and start saying, look, this isn't a good idea, there could be tragedies and there could be, this could spell trouble for local residents, then I think you have to listen to the local residents. You can't just say we're doing this for the good of the British people, and it's the British people who are opposed to it. So you've got to listen to that. And I think this is going to all play out at election time. And I think the Conservatives are going to be in for a shock when they find out that a lot of their voters just won't believe them and won't play along with this anymore.
OK, Harjit, whilst we've got you, I wanted to ask you about another story that's in a lot of the papers this morning. It's from a letter from Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police, and in it he's revealed that almost 100 Metropolitan Police officers have been diverted from serious crime squads to focus on internal standards in a bid to root out colleagues that are deemed unfit for the job. Now, this is very concerning news to lots of people waking up this morning. They'll be very worried about the idea of 100 highly trained Metropolitan Police officers coming off serious crime squads to deal with their own internal issues.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that needs to be dealt with. I mean, I read just now that ultimately about 200 so-called police officers could be rooted out. And, there's problems with racism, sexism, misogynistic. And, when we're having police officers raping people, abusing people, killing people, the public, that's not what a job of a police officer is. They're supposed to defend all of that. It's supposed to prevent all of that. But you can't have a functioning police system when you've got hundreds. And we're not talking about the odd one or two rogue officers here. We're talking about hundreds of officers who aren't operating correctly and who are possibly not well mentally. And definitely they're not there for the public's good. So I think public needs confidence in a system, just as we would in our armed forces and our NHS and everything else. And the police must be able to be fit for purpose. And once again, this comes down to who's the police controlled by? The Home Office. And I think every time I talk to you guys, what do we always say? The Home Office is not fit for purpose. And this has been the case that everyone has admitted, even MPs, even the person in charge of the Home Office has admitted that it's not fit for purpose. So why don't we have a look at the Home Office, restructure it, and have all of this rooted out? While we've got a broken wall, we cannot expect it to support a house. We cannot paper over the cracks anymore and pretend all is okay.
Well, Harjit Singh, Bengal, every time you come on, I think you should be involved in this solution. Excellent analysis, as ever. Thanks again for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
The time is 14 minutes past 7. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories.
And the Home Secretary has been selected to be the Conservative candidate for the proposed new constituency, Fareham and Waterlooville. Suella Braverman faced fellow Hampshire MP Flick Drummond in a party vote over changes to the constituency's boundaries. She won last night by 77 votes to 54.
New research by the Lib Dems shows more than 45,000 burglaries were reported last year and were unattended by police in England. The data found 75% of break-in cases were closed without identifying a suspect. The party has called it a postcode lottery, calling for officers to legally have to visit any burglary victim.
Yeah. Millions of mobile phones across the UK will sound an alarm this month, just like that one, in a new public alert test. The system's intended to be used in life-threatening situations, including flooding and wildfires. The message will be coming through at 3 p.m. on the 23rd of April, vibrating for up to 10 seconds, so keep your ears peeled.
Interesting choice, I think, for that alarm to go off on St George's Day.
Yeah.
At 3 p.m. I mean, everyone's going to be in the pub, aren't they?
You won't even hear it.
It's going to be chaos, isn't it? Well, I think if it's anything like that, you will hear it. Yeah, we'll be drowning out the noise. Let us know what you make about that or any of the stories that we're talking about today. gbviews@gbnews.uk. And also let us know if you're trying to get away this weekend for Easter. You're heading out on the planes, trains, automobiles. If you are, good luck, because we're talking about the Easter travel chaos now, because Dover, the UK's busiest port, is going to build temporary marquees to check passports. It's in an attempt to avoid a repeat of last weekend's travel chaos.
Yeah, it comes as 70 million people hit the roads this weekend for their Easter getaways. And joining us now to discuss this further is travel expert Sally Gethin. So, Sally, every time you come in, there seems to be bad news, but let's try and sort of soften the blow. First of all, let's look at Dover. We saw chaos last weekend. What plans are they putting in place to alleviate that, and why didn't they do them sooner?
Yeah, we did see that. It was horrendous. And this week has all been about crisis planning. And they've erected a large marquee to build more border checks and processing in there, especially for coach parties, which suffered the brunt, if you recall, last weekend.
50 people need their passports checking. It takes forever.
Yeah, it takes forever. So they're doing that. They've run a trial this week and they're putting that into action. They've also asked the ferry operators, DFDS and P&O, to stagger their sailings as well to be able to cope. But the advice, if you are heading to the port or elsewhere, even by road, is to make sure you have essential items with you, food and drink. Sometimes you might need a change of clothing if it could turn into a really long wait.
Yeah.
And make sure you've got any personal items, medical supplies and that kind of thing, that's with you. And if you're a driver, you need to make sure that your car is fully prepped and all the fluid levels are correct, and ideally a first aid box if you need it. Just all those common sense things. And sometimes go out the window when you're in a rush to get off at the last minute.
What are the traffic hotspots this weekend, Sally?
Yeah, so we're looking at the M6, the M4 potentially, the M25. Most of the major roads, like you said, 17 million extra journeys being made this weekend. Yeah. Some of them are going to be very spontaneous based on the weather as well. And obviously you need to keep up to date with traffic alerts in your area and also be prepared for those long waits and, pace yourself. If you're tired, don't don't take on the journey and be patient with other drivers.
OK, let's look to the trains next. I'm travelling on Easter Saturday. I haven't bought a ticket yet. I've probably been quite silly, haven't I?
Yeah, well, you know, don't want to say
Yeah.
silly. But, I'm one of those people that likes to just head off at the last minute as well. But the longer you leave it, and especially if you don't check, the more likely you are to run into some problems, especially Euston, lines going north, the West Coast Mainline Railway
That's a huge... That's Birmingham, that's Manchester, that's chaos.
Yes. Also in Scotland, around Edinburgh, Carlisle, Glasgow, there is disruption on those rail links there as well. A lot of this is for engineering works and so forth. With air travel, for example, you need to make sure you're prepared for that. Don't arrive too early at the airport. The rule of thumb is 3 hours in advance for long haul, 2 hours in advance for short haul. Don't arrive too early, otherwise you'll add to the congestion at the airport. And the 100 millilitre liquids rule is still in place for most airports. I know earlier this week we heard that it was lifted at London City Airport and Teesside, but you still need to make sure that you pack your tiny toiletries in the resealable bag to be able to speed up going through security.
Yeah, really good advice. Thank you so much, Sally Gethin. And best of luck to all of you out there who are trying to hit the roads or the trains or the planes this weekend. But at least we've got some really good advice there from Sally. Yeah. So a fiery debate coming up. Stay with us as a new Channel 4 show sparks backlash for featuring adults stripping naked in front of teenagers in classrooms. We'll debate if nudity is becoming too normalised. This is Breakfast on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us four, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion. 5 times the debate. And 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end. I can't believe I can't Britain's wink. listening.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 24 minutes past 7. Still lots to come on today's programme.
And could keeping secrets from your partner actually be good for your relationship? Might sound counterintuitive, but we'll discuss that at 7:45.
Just after 8 a.m, we'll speak to the government as they announce their £47.5 million plan to fix Britain's most dangerous roads.
And we heard from Quentin Wilson there. He said it would be an echoing raindrop in an ocean, which was a very poetic way of saying that that's just nowhere near enough money to fix £14 billion worth of potholes. Let us know about that and anything else on the show. You can join, of course, by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Now, this debate's sure to wake you up. Channel 4's latest reality show, Naked Education, has sparked widespread backlash for featuring a group of adults stripping fully naked in front of 14 to 16-year-olds in a classroom.
Yes, the show aims to normalise all body types and break down stereotypes, but some say that it's gone too far. So, do they have a point? Is it important to normalise nudity in the classroom? Well, joining us now for this debate this morning is Dr. Mark Bass, the National President of British Naturism, who worked behind the scenes on this Channel 4 show. He says the programme is about education and does not sexualise children. Meanwhile, Caroline Farrow of the Catholic Universe Weekly says it's inappropriate and most teens would cringe. Welcome both and good morning to you. Mark, I want to start with you, if that's OK. Lots of people watching and listening this morning will say this is inappropriate. Adults, fully grown adults, stripping off in front of teenagers.
Well, I think really the challenge we've got in front of us is actually how we do educate our youngsters. So we know that young people are actually getting their education from far more dubious sources. So looking at porn, or even in the best cases, gaining their impression of what a person should look like based on Instagram filtered pictures. So what we really need to be finding is a way that we can actually have that conversation. That's what the show does. I know that there's been a lot of focus on that particular aspect of it. But actually, if you listen to the conversations that are going on, the kids on that show really have had their eyes opened, and they've shown an awful lot of wisdom because they've started to recognise that there are preconceptions that are not entirely accurate and that they really ought to be thinking in a more realistic way about what humanity is.
Well, Mark, I've made a show for Channel 4. I was the front man for Porn on the Brain, and that was about dealing with porn, as you just mentioned. But here's the thing. We didn't show children porn. We didn't show people, naked people to children. Why on earth do you need to tackle nudity by just getting 4 people to get their kit off in front of a classroom? It just feels a bit wrong.
Well, I think the show really just showed that because the kids involved were surprised. This was not their expectation because they are not encountering real people. And the knock-on effect that is having on these children and how it's affecting their development, how it's affecting their mental health, how it's affecting the way that they are then going into relationships becomes a real problem. So it's just a matter of how do we actually educate young people? So if we're not doing it this way, then what is the better way of doing it rather than just sweeping the problem under the carpet?
OK, Caroline, let's take this over to you then. Should we be showing children real bodies? Because if we don't show them it this way, they'll learn about it via porn.
I think it's confecting a problem where no problem exists. In that, yes,
I agree, body positivity is a very good thing, but this can be taught in completely different ways to exposing children to adults stripping off naked. This is about breaking down natural boundaries. Us as adults, we don't choose to be confronted by naked people. And it's about saying, oh, here you are, kids, completely normal, get your kit off in front of everybody, and breaking down those natural barriers. And concerningly, when you look at the performers who are involved in this show, they all have, semi-pornographic backgrounds. One is a sex toy reviewer, another, if you look her up on YouTube, sings explicit songs. You've even got in this series somebody who was born female who now identifies as a man, stripping naked. Now, this person has had a double mastectomy and has had a procedure, a phalloplasty, to construct, an artificial penis for them. Now, this again is normalizing gender ideology, gender theory, the idea that it's, that somebody can change their body and normalizing actually what is pretty shocking and graphic surgery. There is no need to do this to teach children body positivity. And also, it's about commoditizing the human body and about commoditizing sexual relationships. When you fall in love with somebody, when you're in a romantic relationship, you love them body and soul. And it's about saying to kids, oh, okay, it's all about the body, it's all about the body. And there are healthier ways of engendering that mindset. And, I'm mum to 5 children. I've got 3 teenagers at the moment. I can tell you my eldest, who's gone through all of this, never got exposed to naked people, and has a completely healthy attitude when it comes to, self-image, body positivity. I think schools can do very well in PSHE here, but without actually having to expose children to naked bodies. And, your other speaker is president of the British Naturism Society, which is all about, getting your kit off in public. And, most people do feel very uncomfortable when they're confronted with nudity, because it's very intimate, and you don't actually want to see a naked person doing your shopping or when you're out to walk.
Caroline, if I could bring Dr. Mark back in now, what would you say to this accusation that's coming out there that this is crossing the Rubicon, as it were, from education towards indoctrination? And one of the words that's been put around is this is like child grooming, in a sense. The normalisation of alternative lifestyles, the normalisation of nudity, the normalisation is going too far. This is going from education, it's becoming something else. It's more like activism and indoctrination.
Well, I think the most concerning point raised there is that there's not a problem, because that's clearly not true. So if we look at sort of young women, 1 in 5 young women are self-harming, and that's a number that's tripled over the last few years. Suicide is the leading cause of death in young men. And so there clearly are problems here. And so these are arising from people's poor self-image. So we know the body of dysmorphia.
You've got to be very, very careful about this. You've got to be very careful about attributing suicide and self-harming to poor body image. Now, these are very complex mental health issues, and you cannot just simply say, well, okay, there's this epidemic. We have to be very careful. There are media guidelines about how we talk about suicide and how we talk about mental health. And where you have a young person who's self-harming, they are not. We cannot say they are self-harming because of poor body image, because there could be 1,000,001 other complex reasons and comorbidities, mental health problems that they have that's leading them to self-harm. So there is no way that, and there is a difficulty with mental health crisis in this country among young people. I've been subject to that, to the lack of resources myself. But the reason that we have this is not because of poor self-body image. It's things like lockdown. It's keeping children in isolation for 2 years. It isn't, body image may be a part of it for some, but actually, this is part of this ideology to say, oh, okay, people are committing suicide, and if you don't show children naked strangers, then they're going to have a really poor body image.
Dr. Mark,
no.
come back in on that, Dr. Mark.
Yeah. I would certainly agree that exposure to nudity is not a fix-all for everything. As you say, it is these mental health issues are complicated. But I think if we're just going back to think about that sort of question about grooming, part of the problem that we've got in the way our young people are developing is that because they're not actually encountering real bodies and recognizing what normal bodies look like, what normal sexual health looks like, they're actually building their sexual preferences and their sexual development based on watching that pornography. Then that means that we're actually neglecting our young people and we're almost throwing them to the wolves. I don't know if you watched the show, but you saw that all of the young people on that show, or those kids, had watched pornography, and the sort of studies that come out of both the British government and the American government show that by the age of 17, 17% of kids have seen porn. Sorry, 75% of kids have seen pornography. So to try and say that, okay, we're not going to educate them about the real body and therefore we're going to isolate them from nudity is clearly not true. They're going to be encountering nudity. All we can do is actually
Dr. Mark, need to interject. Final word to Caroline. So the point there is kids are seeing too much porn. So the way we solve that is by showing them naked people in classrooms.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And so the way we stop children from seeing pornography is having tighter controls on pornography. And by the time you have seen pornography, if you've seen pornography as a child, it's incredibly dangerous and it can alter your brain chemistry. And so you don't just go, okay, well, you've been binging on, it's like saying, okay, well, you've been binging on chocolate. Well, let's binge on crisps instead. This is why.
But Caroline, there's no control that could be put on porn that would actually stop children from finding it.
Well, actually, there are many controls that could be put on the internet to make porn much more difficult for children to access. And also parents need to kind of step up to the plate here. As mum to kids myself, I can absolutely tell you hand on heart that my children aren't looking at pornography because I've got a pretty tight handle on what they can and can't access on the internet. But actually, internet providers can do an awful lot more to help block out pornography. And, and children, it's a really defeatist attitude to say, oh, well, they're going to see it anyway, so let's show them, some different naked people for them to ogle over. And I think actually most kids would find this pretty cringe. Just seeing somebody else's body isn't going to go, oh, do you know what, mine? And in fact, again, it's encouraging children to think of themselves purely in terms of body image. And in fact, we need to get people to think about themselves, body and soul, that there is so much more to us as human beings than our bodies and what we look like, and trying to sort of make ourselves feel good and presentable to others.
OK, thank you, Caroline Farrow and Dr. Mark Bass. A hugely fiery debate, very civilised though, well done, and that's sure to get you going out there. Please send us in your views on this topic this morning, please. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Now, stay with us. We'll be discussing the royal family's earnings as the Guardian newspaper reveals they took £1.2 billion in private income from their various estates last year. Andy Jones and Amy Cameron will be having their say on that next.
And this is Breakfast on GB News with Martin and Ellie.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 7:14. It's time to go through the papers in some detail now with writer and journalist Andy Jones and environmental campaigner Amy Cameron. Good morning to you both.
Top of the morning.
Andy, let's start with you, shall we? This is a story in The Guardian about royal family income. They're making lots of money from their private estates.
Yes, The Guardian screams, royals took $1.2 billion in private income from estates. Well, it doesn't necessarily say in the headline, and this is from Queen Elizabeth's reign and King Charles. Yeah. Obviously, coronation year, this is a very hot topic, and it took just 16 Guardian writers to compile this story, so obviously they cared very deeply about this. What's interesting about this is obviously coronation year. Prince Charles obviously dodged, depending on your position, whether on 652 million inheritance, no tax. He paid when he inherited it from the Queen. This huge sort of profile story about what King Charles owns, what the royal family owns, in a year when the coronation makes this very, very newsworthy. I think it's actually, I'm not necessarily interested in the big figures. I'm interested in the sort of absurd things they own. Everything from sort of Oval Cricket Ground, a hotel in Reading. They've just bought some other thing in Redditch. They also own warehouses, Savoy property. They own around 52,500 hectares across the country.
Crown estate.
And it pays them £20 million a year. Yep. And that's basically the top and bottom of the story. It changes nobody's mind, of course, because if you're a royalist, you're thinking, well, I don't mind, I'm very happy with the royal family. If you're a Republican, you're thinking, well, off with their heads, etc., let's claw this money back. But in a cost of living crisis, this does bring into sharp focus, one, the cost of the coronation. Is King Charles going to be paying more towards it? Yeah. Two, the inheritance that he received when Her Majesty died and not paying any inheritance tax on that. And also, you know, King Charles talking about slimming down the royal family and which figures are going to be part of it. But also, let's have a conversation about, could you sell some of this off to pay for some stuff? Yeah. We've got debts, Your Honour, Your Majesty, can we pay some things off with this?
I want to bring you in here, Amy, because a big chunk of the Crown Estate revenue now is from offshore wind farms, because, of course, the Crown Estate extends to cover our sea areas. Mm-hmm. And there was a big donation from Charles from that money. So it's not all bad that the Crown is making money like this, and they're giving it away. And this feeds into you. They're actually environmentalists making money from that.
Yeah, I think at a time when we know that the public sector is struggling so much and so are so many families, right? The information about the kind of huge wealth that is accumulated by the royal families, it does just smart, I think, more than ever. So I think what's important to note is that we as taxpayers contribute 86 million, and that was the amount that we gave the royal family last year. They got like a bumper year because of renovations required to Buckingham Palace. So the money that we're talking about here, which is actually 40 million a year, is in addition to what we're already contributing. And it comes from their estate, which they claim is private money. But I think if you look back in history, how did they accumulate this land and wealth? You know, it's under old feudal rules and fights. So the estates that they own, the Lancaster and Cornwall estate, are huge. And as you've pointed out, Andy, growing. You know, they are accumulating more assets as they go.
But it's worth pointing out, the figures here is that an extra 1 billion generated this year was from wind farms.
Yes.
So how come the Guardian are so upset? The environmentalist Guardian, they're making £1 billion and giving it back. So they're making money out of renewable energy, but they're still getting coated off for it.
Exactly that point, though, right? There is huge amounts of money to be made in renewable energy because offshore wind has been a huge success story in the UK. But because we've got such a lax attitude to both land ownership and foreign investment, very, very little of the profits of the renewable industry in terms of offshore wind are coming back to the British taxpayer. So absolutely, the UK is a huge success story in terms of offshore wind, but we're not seeing nearly enough of those profits because they're going back to Charles. Now, Charles did recognise this at the time. I love that I'm on first-name terms with him here. That's a development no one expected. But it shouldn't be at their discretion whether or not that money comes into the public purse. And I think the reason the Guardian are going hard on this right now is that the royal family are in a period of vulnerability now, right? We are moving from an incredibly long-standing and incredibly popular royal to Charles, who just does not command the same public support. And if you look at polling, people under 25 years old, 40% of them back the abolishing of the monarchy. Now, you might say that'll change as they get older, but that's cause for concern for the royals. And obviously the Guardian are going in on this, and rightly so, because at the very least there should be more transparency about the income they get from their private wealth. And that, I think, should be taken into consideration when we decide how much additional money we give them from a public purse.
You could also conclude it's the Guardian hate the royal family. Shocker.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably to be expected. Andy is right. I think it won't necessarily change people's minds. Although I do think in the context of, you know, we've seen scandal after scandal when it comes to the royal family. So one of the things that which this reporting reveals is that they think that the money from the private wealth of the Queen, so from these estates, is what paid off Virginia Giuffre in the Prince Andrew scandal. So I think there's real questions to be asked about how the royal family accumulate wealth, how they then use it, especially at a time when I think any wealth that's being generated in the UK should be appropriately taxed and brought back to the British taxpayer.
Good. Let's move on.
Hey, Andy, you've got a story in the Mirror about sewage being dumped off the coastline on average every 3 minutes and 45 seconds.
Absolutely. They scream tide of filth, which I think is the follow-up to Blondie's Tide is High, of course. But sewage dumped basically every 3.5 minutes. This impacted of 139 constituencies in the UK, 137 of them. This goes in again with the tide of deregulation by the Conservative Party. Therese Coffey had promised unlimited fines just a few months ago. Then she said £250 million fines were too much. And then yesterday she was sort of wringing her hands saying, oh, well, I think it's a complicated problem and we don't want to jump to any conclusions. This is something politically I think everybody can agree with. We had this same government, barely a year ago, making people wear masks, wash your hands, don't stand too close to granny, hygiene absolutely important.
One way round.
But actually, we're going to dump loads and loads of faeces in your local waterways, which your dog's going to run in, your kids are going to play in. You know, what kind of biohazard mess are we unleashing on Britain, where these rivers are dying, these streams are dying, and the government's answer is basically, oh, you know, we'll kick it down the road because it's too expensive to deal with. Many of these water companies have paid billions and billions of pounds in share dividends, and they've not been rebuilding the sewage network, which is part of what they're contracted to do.
So is this the government's fault, or is it the private company's fault for not doing the correct treating?
Well, it's A and B, isn't it? The private companies, they're paying big shareholder dividends. They're also in huge amount of debt while they're paying off these shareholder dividends, directors' fees, etc. And also you've got to pay for the constructs and the big Lego that you've got to look after. You know, part of the job is to not just say, oh, well, we're making lots of money out of water, which, let's face it, we haven't got any choice to pay those bills. We can't go and look for a different competitor in most of our regions, can we?
All right. Amy, we've got about 20 seconds, but I do want to come to you because this is something you really care about as an environmental campaigner.
Yeah, I mean, this story continues to appall people, I think, right? So we're talking about slurry, sewage and microplastics in our river. 800 sewage spills a day in the UK last year. And I think exactly to Andy's point, Ofwat, who are the regulator of the water companies, have said that these companies have made more than enough in profits to improve and maintain the water systems that we have. But they're funneling out of the country. Most of our water system is owned by sovereign wealth funds of other countries and private companies. And capitalism's going to do what capitalism does. Right now, it makes more business sense for them to pay fines than it does for them to invest in the water system. So that's what they're going to do.
OK, Amy Cameron, Andy Jones, thanks for that. Stick around, please. We'd like to be involved in our next item on keeping secrets in relationships.
Yes, because when it comes to relationships, is honesty always the best policy, or sometimes is it better to bite your tongue?
Well, according to one relationship expert, there are some secrets that are better kept and can even spice up your romance.
But is there such a thing as a healthy secret? Well, let's put this to relationship therapist Sally Baker, who joins us now. Good morning to you, Sally. So this is very interesting. Actually, keeping secrets might lead to a better relationship. Tell us more.
Depends what the motivation is for keeping a secret. Some secrets are really benign and some can be really malevolent and destructive. The problem with secrets is they tend to have a way of coming to light, and keeping a secret demands quite a lot of energy. Even murderers in prison have a compulsion to admit their crimes. So, you know, naturally, people are mainly honest and they struggle with keeping secrets. It takes energy and commitment. So, you know, it's not the ideal way to go, but we're not living in a time of the Waltons anymore. People go into relationships fully formed. They're adults in their own right. They have their own history, their own past, their own finances. We don't need to disclose everything. We're allowed to have some secrets.
Like your analysis there of comparing a relationship to a murder, it's not always like that. But in terms of the types of secrets that would be best kept secret, what kind of thing do you think you should keep mum on?
Keep mum on your, keep stum on your sexual past, perhaps. And the kind of secrets that are malevolent are things when you're hiding something and your motivation is shame, fear or guilt. So if you've developed a porn habit or a gambling habit and your finances are wrecked and you're keeping that all secret, that happens very regularly in relationships. Online gambling is more and more of a problem. Those things are going to be majorly destructive to your relationship when they come to light. Benign secrets can be things like, you know, you're planning a secret party for your partner. That's a secret, but it's not malevolent. It's benign. It's harmless. It really depends on the motivation of keeping the secret, why you need to keep it. If the driving force is shame or guilt, it's probably a toxic secret.
OK, I can feel Andy and Amy's buttocks clenching here because we're about to ask you what kind of secrets, Andy, do you think is good to keep from your missus?
We keep absolutely loads of secrets. We don't follow me and my wife, we don't follow each other on social media. We're not even friends on Facebook, which is astonishing to me. And I've just come back from an international trip yesterday, and my wife is going away to a completely different country this weekend.
Be careful where this one's going. Yeah, what do you get up to on your trip?
It was a boring, I won't say boring, but it was a business trip that it was essential that I was away. Thankfully, it wasn't another stag do. I can't handle anything.
What goes on tour stays on tour. Good one, Amy?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, right? Because there's a difference between like secrecy and discretion, I think. And I think that, you know, what your other commentator was speaking to there was much more what feel like problematic secrets, right? You're hiding something. That to me feels quite different from like maintaining a degree of privacy, whether that's something like, you know, closing the door while you're peeing, or I think it is important, particularly for women, to maintain control and some degree of discretion, I guess, over their finances.
Yeah,
that's a really good point. In fact, Sally, can I bounce back to you on that? So particularly around finances. For example, I've never had a joint bank account. It's not for me. That's a healthy thing, isn't it? So if you can manage your own money, and that's perfectly healthy to have financial secrets.
It's down to each couple to make their own arrangements, but it's very common now for couples to maintain their own personal accounts and have a joint account for all the household bills and the outgoings. And I know of clients that have actually withheld information from their partner about bonuses or rises because they don't want to pay any more into the family pot. I mean, that happens. So people do keep secrets about their finances. And if you're coming into your second or third marriage, your finances are probably quite complex. So, and you know, we now understand that marriages don't last forever, relationships don't last forever. We date throughout our whole lives quite often. And that's our business. That's our past. That's our stuff.
Yeah, Sally, I wanted to pick you up on Amy's point there. I mean, where is the line between a secret and just retaining a little bit of mystery?
Yeah, the whole of the Kama Sutra is about retaining mystery and preparing to be together when you're, you know, by being separate. So the line is, what motivates you to keep this secret? Is it something that is toxic, dangerous, destructive to your relationship? Is it disrespectful to your partner? Or is it something that is just your business and that's privacy? And that's fine. That's healthy to maintain some sense of self. We need to maintain sense of self.
OK, Sally Baker, relationships expert, therapist. Thanks for joining us. And also to you, Andy and Amy. What a morning it's been. We've had the Kama Sutra, we've had full nudity, and we're just warming up. So please stay with us. We'll have more on the arrest and the release of Peter Murrell, as Nicola Sturgeon pledges to fully cooperate with the investigation.
But first, here's your weather forecast with Greg Dewhurst.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We'll see some heavy showers across the UK through the day ahead. There will be some sunny spells over the next few days, temperatures on the rise. So low pressure in charge of our weather at the moment, but this starts to slip away into Good Friday and the Easter weekend, and it allows high pressure to build and settle things down. Generally, however, weather fronts will try and move in, particularly as we get to Monday. So heavy showers already from the word go this morning across northern parts of England, across into Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, generally dry start with some sunny spells. But as we move through the day, increasing risk of some heavy thundery showers across parts of Wales, the Midlands, central southern England. Elsewhere, we'll generally see sunny spells. Rain holding on, though, across Shetland and Orkney as we move into the afternoon. In any sunny spells, we should see highs of around 15 or 16 Celsius, so feeling a little warmer than it did on Wednesday. Into the evening time, we could see those showers merge into some longer spells of rain, particularly down eastern parts of England. But elsewhere, we'll see clearing skies, and that will allow temperatures to drop away as we head overnight. Temperatures, parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland falling close to, if not below freezing, leading to a patchy frost here, just holding up across the far southeast where we have thicker cloud and some patchy rain. It means a chilly start to Friday morning, but plenty of blue skies, with the exception being just the east coast of England and also far northeast of Scotland. Here we could see some low cloud lingering through the day, perhaps thick enough for the odd spot of light rain or drizzle. So feeling quite cool here, but elsewhere in the sunshine into the afternoon, a warm feeling day, 16 or 17 Celsius in that sunshine, making it feel pretty pleasant for the time of year. This warm, dry weather holds on through Saturday and into Sunday. Plenty of sunshine, but it does turn cooler and more unsettled as we head into Easter Monday. Those temperatures just dropping a little to around average for the time of year.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nicola Sturgeon vows to fully cooperate with investigators after her husband faced 11 hours of questioning by police.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Thursday, the 6th of April. This is Breakfast on GB News with Martin Daubney and Ellie Costello.
And here's what's leading the news this morning. Nicola Sturgeon's husband Peter Murrell has been released pending further investigation into the SNP's finances after a day of questioning. A spokesperson for the former First Minister said she had no prior knowledge of the police's plans to arrest her husband.
The Prime Minister has defended the move to house migrants in a barge off the coast of Dorset, calling the proposal fair. Rishi Sunak said the 3-deck vessel called the Bibi Stockholm could hold at least 500 people.
And nearly 100 Metropolitan Police officers have been moved from tackling serious crime to instead investigate wrongdoing within their own force. In a letter to the Home Secretary, Commissioner Mark Rowley said there were hundreds of officers who shouldn't even be there.
And the Port of Dover will build temporary marquees to check passports as it moves to avoid another weekend of travel chaos. It comes as drivers are warned to expect delays from today as 17 million cars hit the road over the Easter weekend.
And as usual, you can join in any of our discussions today by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. So to our top story this morning, the former chief executive of the SNP and husband of Nicola Sturgeon, Peter Murrell, has been released without charge after being detained for 11 hours by police.
Nicola Sturgeon has pledged to fully cooperate with investigators following the arrest yesterday morning, which saw officers seen taping off and searching the couple's Glasgow home.
Let's go to Glasgow now, where we can talk to our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, you're outside the house there. What's the latest?
Yes, well, still quite a heavy police presence here today outside the home of Peter Murrell and Nicola Sturgeon in Glasgow. Police entered here today around 7:30 yesterday morning, shortly after the former First Minister left, and we understand that Peter Murrell was arrested in connection to an ongoing investigation into what Police Scotland say are finances and funding of the party. Now, to take you back a little bit, you know, after 2017, the SNP, one of the biggest memberships in Scottish politics, were quite adept at raising money, all 667,000 of it, which was supposed to be ring-fenced for a second independence referendum. Now, going into 2020, that money had reduced down to less than £100,000, and then followed the year later, Operation Branchform was launched by Police Scotland to investigate various criminal reports and complaints into how that money was handled. Now, not just here in Glasgow, but also in Edinburgh, SNP HQ was raided by police yesterday. Dozens of officers leaving the scene in the middle of the afternoon with large green boxes containing, well, who knows, I guess that will come out in the wash. Now, we've obviously heard quite a lot. Police Scotland last night reminded everybody that this is still an active investigation, and therefore, as the report is sent to the Crown Procurator Fiscal, that the Contempt of Court Act still applies. Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, a spokesperson for her, has said she will, of course, help the police in any way, shape or form if required to do so. But at the moment, no request has been made. And of course, Hamza Yousaf, this is not the way that he wanted his first full week as Scotland's new First Minister to go, but certainly he has had quite an eventful week and quite a firestorm. Now, he has also maintained this is not the reason why Nicola Sturgeon stepped down from her role as First Minister, but he also, after going through that rather gruelling leadership contest, he has also stepped back from being this continuity candidate, reminding everyone that he has not had a finance role in the party, but you know, he will take the party to a new direction. So quite a lot happening here. Peter Murrell obviously released last night from arrest in police custody without charge, but very much, as you can see from the scene behind me here, quite a huge police presence remains in Glasgow.
Yes, Tony. And what does this mean for the SNP going forward? A very challenging time, especially for Hamza Yousaf, as you say, just 1 week into the new job.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of questions are going to be raised now. A lot, you know, we saw in the last week of that leadership contest over a weekend 3 really high-profile resignations. One of them, of course, being Peter Murrell. Certainly the direction the SNP has gone over the last, you know, arguably right back to Alex Salmond. This culture of secrecy and a lack of transparency is something that has come under much scrutiny. You know, going right back all the way, as I say, to Alex Salmond before the first independence referendum. You know, Hamza Yousaf has planted his flag in the sand. He's, you know, urged the NEC, the National Executive Committee of the SNP, and they seem to agree that, you know, whatever path that the SNP has taken towards secrecy and this fortress of information, that's not going to stand going forward. That the public expect and demand more transparency from the largest political party in Scotland.
Right, really good to have that update from you there. And you're going to remain outside the house of Nicola Sturgeon and Peter Murrell. And of course, you're going to bring us any updates throughout the day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and also earlier we spoke to former SNP member and political commentator Stuart Crawford, who told us what effect this could have on Scottish independence.
The independence movement north of the border has now stalled because not only do we have the adverse public relations disaster, which is the arrest and release of Peter Murrell, but we also have the fact that Westminster will not in any way condone or grant the means whereby a legally and constitutionally binding independence referendum can be held. So the SNP and the wider independence movement is stuck between a rock and a hard place. There is no route forward that anybody can discern at the moment, and it puts the independence movement back several years, I would think.
OK, so the new tax year has started this morning with some big changes on the horizon. From today, high earners will pay substantially more tax as a threshold for the 45% additional rate falls by nearly £25,000.
Well, however, for pension savers, there's significant beneficial change as allowances and thresholds are increased or scrapped.
So what do you need to know to get a head start this tax year? The head of personal finance at AJ Bell, Laura Souter, joins us now to help. So Laura, what are the big changes that we need to be aware of in this new tax year?
So you covered a couple of them there. So the biggest one is that additional rate, so the rate at which 45% income tax kicks in, is reducing. So it was £150,000 and now it's just over £125,000. It's £125,140 to be exact. So anyone who earns within that band over £125,000 is going to face a higher tax bill this year than they did last year.
It's just more people paying more tax. And who'd have thought that would happen under a Conservative government?
Yeah, and so I think on top of that, there's everyone else normally would see the threshold at which they hit different rates of income tax increase. And those thresholds have been frozen again, and they're actually going to be frozen all the way up until 2028. And so what that means is that as all of us get those little pay rises each year, or you get a promotion, you get a chunky pay rise, you're actually going to be taxed more on that money than you would have been if the government had kept up with its usual thing of increasing those thresholds by inflation each year. And that's a particularly big issue this year because inflation is so high, and so we're seeing those annual wage increases be higher than usual, and that means that everyone's facing a bit more tax.
And Laura, some people will be looking at these new changes and thinking they may want to reassess their finances. What would your advice to them be?
So I think the UK tax system is so complicated now, and there's lots of sneaky points where you get caught out by different tax rates. And that happens all across the spectrum. So whether that's people that are earning £50,000 and would be eligible for child benefit but start to see it lost after that point up to £60,000, or if it's people earning over £100,000 who face this tricky higher tax rate. I think it's being aware of what your earnings are, particularly if you've got a pay rise, how that might be impacted by certain allowances you get, certain thresholds you might have hit, and then looking at ways that you can manoeuvre around that legally, obviously.
OK, so is it true you can start filing your tax return from today? And that would be super, super keen. But what about for freelancers? Is it still too late for them to put in their self-assessment from last time?
So the deadline for self-assessment is the 31st of January. Most people file right up to the deadline on that day. If you've missed it, then you will face fines and penalties for missing it, unless you meet the taxman's reasonable excuses. And you can go on the website and check on there. But if anyone has missed the deadline, then I would say file it quickly rather than burying your head in the sand and thinking, oh, I've missed the deadline now, so I won't bother.
It's almost like you're looking right down the barrel, telling me that advice, because that does apply to me. Laura Souter, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Head of Personal Finance at AJ Bell. Thank you.
Yeah, very useful advice there. Now, Rishi Sunak has defended his plan to house up to 500 asylum seekers on a barge in Portland Harbour in Dorset, calling it fair.
It's all part of the government's strategy to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in hotel accommodation, which currently costs the taxpayer up to £7 million every single day.
Well, joining us now to discuss this all this morning is Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Roads and Local Transport, Richard Holden. Good morning to you, Richard. And I know that you're here today to talk about roads and improving Britain's roads, and we will, of course, touch on that. But we did want to start by asking you about Rishi Sunak's new plan to house migrants on a barge just off the coast of Dorset. It's been called inhumane by councillors down in that council in Dorset. 500 migrants on board. Is this somewhere you'd like to live?
Well, I think what we need to do is try and tackle the asylum
backlog as quickly as we can. And this is, I think, the first step in that direction. I hope we see more of these across the country, and also the use of some of those military bases as well. I think what we want to do is tackle that backlog, stop people crossing the channel, stop providing some of those pull factors, and I'm really glad that this is one of the Prime Minister's top 5 priorities, is tackling these small boats, stopping the boats, and I think this is a really important step in that direction.
Well, it's just a drop in the ocean, really, isn't it? 500 migrants. It's not even 0.5% of the backlog of illegal migrants that we're seeing in this country.
You're absolutely right. This is just the start of a process. So I've spoken to the Immigration Minister about this before. We're looking at doing these in all the ports right across the country as well. And I think anybody calling it inhumane needs to actually look at what's happened in Scotland over the last few years, where the Scottish government have been housing some of their Ukrainian refugees in some of these boats while they await processing in Scotland as well. So I think that's total nonsense. What I want to see, though, is the asylum backlog reduced. I want to see people out of hotels, and I want to see the situation dealt with. That's exactly what my constituents want, and that's what the government's doing, because we're going to deliver on that promise to stop the boats. And one of the key things to do that is to stop the pull factors here to the UK. And I don't want to see either local communities right across the country having people put into the hotel accommodation locally. I want to see as many of these self-contained boats or barges or these military air bases as possible, so that local services can be maintained for local people, and that these things can be dealt with as quickly as possible when people do cross illegally. But the entire thing is that I want to see our borders strengthened and people not coming here illegally in the first place.
OK, Mr. Holmes, but you still didn't give an answer if you'd like to stay on there yourself. I suspect that's a no. But I want to turn now to the front page of the Times today. Another front page.
I wouldn't cross illegally into the UK either.
OK, just let's talk about the front page of the Times today. Another day, another cash for access scandal for the Conservative Party. This time, Scott Benton for Blackpool South has had the whip withdrawn after offering access to gambling companies. He's, of course, the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on betting and gambling. A scandal you could well do without at the moment.
Well, look, I think it's quite right that it's been referred to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. The government toughened the rules not that long ago to say that people couldn't do paid lobbying for companies. And furthermore, he's also, the Chief Whip, suspended the whip from Mr Benton yesterday. Look, I was a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on tackling gambling harm, along with Ian Duncan-Smith, who's done a lot of campaigning in this area, another Conservative MP, Ronnie Cowan from the SNP and Carolyn Harris from Labour, all key members of that. And one of the things we've been putting pressure on over the last few years is for a proper review of the 2005 Gambling Act, which was passed by the last Labour government.
OK, Richard.
It's one of the things which wasn't looked at or really understood at the time was issues around online gambling.
OK, Richard, that's all fine and well, but it's not an isolated incident. We saw recently the led by Donkey's Sting, Matt Hancock, Kwasi Kwarteng also offering their services for sale. When are you guys going to get a handle on this? Because this sends out a terrible idea that Tory MPs are for sale.
I think those other ones are quite separate issues. This one is very serious, and that's why the party has moved very swiftly to suspend the whip, and also has been referred to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. I think that's exactly what was the right thing to do, and I think it starts to show the system is working when actually this paid-for lobbying has been banned by the government, and anybody who breaches the rules faces a full force of them. That's what I'd expect in our system.
I wanted to ask about the government alert system. That's an alarm message that's going to sound on all mobile devices. I'm very interested in the timing of this. Why has that been decided to be tested at 3 p.m. on St George's Day? It's not very patriotic.
Well, I think you've got to choose a time to do it. I don't think there's ever a perfect time to do it, but I think letting people know well in advance that we're testing this system is the right thing to do. I think it's just a sensible precaution that we can get this thing sorted out. I wouldn't read any more into it than it's a convenient time, talked about well in advance, which is exactly what we should do when we're doing things like this. We wouldn't want to scare anybody unnecessarily.
OK, Mr Holden, thank you so much. And let's talk about what you're actually here to talk about today, which is the safety of Britain's roads. It's the £50 million package that you're announcing today. And reading through the detail, it looks as though the focus is going to be on improving signage and road markings on the most dangerous roads in Britain. But we've just been speaking to a motoring journalist who says the focus here is all wrong. It needs to be on damaged roads in Britain, those covered in potholes. And he says he estimates the backlog for those damaged roads is going to take 11 years to fix, and it's going to cost £14 billion. I mean, this 50 million, he described it as a raindrop echoing in the ocean. What do you say to that?
Well, what I'd say is that we're putting around £5 billion into our road network infrastructure over the next few years on exactly trying to deal with these maintenance issues. And we've put another 200 million quid on top for this year into the budget as well. So that's £5,200 million over the next few years looking into this. But I also want to tackle road safety. There are some parts of the country, specific roads, all of your viewers will have them in their areas, where they know these are generally smaller A roads, where there's things like adverse cambers, which need to be fixed, poor junctions, which need to be improved, which cause road accidents, and 27 schemes. This is the third tranche of the Road Safety Fund we've launched. We're hoping to do another one later this year as well. We're really investing to try and tackle some of these issues around road safety. And what I'd say for this £50 million investment today on 27 schemes, from the Isle of Wight to Surrey to Suffolk, all the way up to Newcastle and Lancashire, is what we're trying to do is target some of the worst roads where there's a real road safety issue there. This money is going to really help save lives as well. We estimate around 750 fatalities or serious injuries will be prevented over the next 20 years by this investment. So yes, it saves lives. Yes, it stops families going through that tragedy of seeing someone killed or seriously injured, but it also provides a really sensible use of public money and a good return to the taxpayer as well, which is something else I'm very keen on seeing. I'm not saying it's everything, but this is the third tranche of this money, and we really are trying to tackle some of the key worst roads in the country with this fund. Alongside driver behaviour, actually some of these junctions and these road surfaces are some of the major issues we see when we're trying to tackle issues around road safety in the country, and I'm glad we're getting that investment here today.
OK, Mr Holdham, a laudable scheme. We're about to approach the great Easter getaway. 17 million motorists due to hit the roads. What's the government doing to help lessen the pain?
Well, I'll be hitting the road myself over the next couple of days up to my constituency in North West Durham. And one of the things that we have done already is we've removed as many of the roadworks on our main strategic road network as we can. We try and do that at pinch points like this around getaway times for people, to try and make those journeys as swift as possible right across the country. That's the most important thing we can do. And on the other side, I'd just say around public transport, the department's working very hard to try and get final settlement with the unions, with a fair pay deal, so that we don't see our public transport network disrupted either at the moment. And I would say, over the Easter break, if you fancy it, you can use our Get Around for £2 bus scheme. That goes all the way through to the 30th of June on some of our lovely rural routes with buses as well. I've got some really beautiful routes up in North West Durham, but there are some right across the country, and it's a really cost-efficient way for people to get out and see the great British countryside.
Richard Holden, thanks for your input this morning, and have a safe trip back this Easter. Thank you very much.
Let us know what you thought about that and any of the stories that we touched upon with Richard Holden. GBNews at gbnews.uk. And stay with us, because as Frank Lampard makes a triumphant return to Stamford Bridge as interim manager at Chelsea, Coity is going to have his say on that next.
And you're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Ellie and Martin.
I I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion, 5 times the debate, and 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end. I can't Britain's
wink.
listening.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 25 minutes past 7. Still lots to come on today's programme.
Yeah, with almost half of homeowners dusting off the toolbox. This bank holiday weekend at 8:45, we'll speak to an expert about DIY and where it goes wrong. And please try not to go to A&E.
And the King will attend his first Royal Maundy service as monarch later on this morning. We'll have all the details of the Easter tradition just after 9 a.m.
And you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk. Of course, tweet us @gbnews. And Ellie, we've had a load come in so far.
Yes, lots of you responding to adults stripping off in front of teenagers in the classroom. This is a debate we were having earlier. It's a new Channel 4 show called, what is it? Naked Education.
Yep.
Naked Education. Jason says, last week it was sex toys on the school curriculum. Now they're stripping off adults in front of kids to educate them, in inverted commas. Of course, one of them has had sex change surgery. When is the sexualisation of our children in school going to stop?
Yeah, and that's a sentiment echoed by Caroline from Plymouth, who says, I'm appalled that this Naked Education programme is allowed to be shown, especially before the watershed of 9 o'clock. How is it not just another form of paedophilia? as most of those children are underage. Strong words, but kind of got a point. I mean, this is an advancement. It's fair to say that nobody out there actually agrees with this show being a good idea.
Well, let us know if you agree that perhaps showing children real bodies is better than watching it on porn. That's certainly what the doctor in that debate was saying. GBNews at gbnews.uk. We'll try and share as many as we can throughout the programme.
And on a lighter note, and he's promised not to get naked, go through the papers now with all the sports news. Coity, you're in town, so look, what an action.
I didn't promise, OK? I said probably not. Yes.
Well, it is Easter.
It is Easter.
Anyway, so look, loads of action in the Premier League last night. West Ham hammered by Newcastle.
See what you did? Yep, they were, absolutely. Newcastle just on the up. West Ham completely the opposite. So it's like David Moyes. What are they going to do with David Moyes? Is he going to stick around? They're in all sorts of trouble, whereas Newcastle, like I say, just at the other end, they are really hitting form, heading towards
the crucial time.
League, but the defending from West Ham was bad. So is David Moyes going to be number 14? I don't think it's going to happen, because I think if he was going to be fired, it would have happened by now. And also the amount of managers. There's so many clubs that are looking for managers. We've got Chelsea, which we'll get onto in just a second, Spurs, Leicester. So what do West Ham do? Do they jump in and say, well, we need a manager as well, or stick with what we've got and hope for the best, which is what seems to be happening at the moment?
It seems that Moyes has been pretty unpopular, though, with the West Ham faithful for quite a long time. So he's got to be sort of surely on death row.
You know, he's been on death row for a while, but then you get a stay of execution, and then you'll get a result, and then it's... I just have a feeling he's going to be around. I think he'll stick around, and then we'll see what happens. I mean, if they get relegated, I mean, who knows? He may even still be there then. You just don't know with boards these days. Some are very quick to pull the trigger, and others wait. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, Man United finding form again. That man Rashford popping up once again.
He's unbelievable. I think it's 28th this year. Again, they're not as good as they probably were a few weeks ago. They've been a bit stoppy-starty. I mean, it was a terrible start for Erik ten Hag. Then things got good. And now, since they won the Carabao Cup, slightly on the slide, but they're in that hunt for the top four as well. So it's Newcastle there, Manchester United and Spurs just underneath them. So that's the way things are looking. But really, I mean, the big story in the Premier League is Frank Lampard.
Yes, let's have a word on him.
It's incredible, really, Ellie. I mean, Frank Lampard, who was a Chelsea legend, of course, fired from Chelsea a couple of years ago. And then went to Everton, never worked out, fired at Everton, and now is going back as interim manager. Now, there's a few ways of looking at this. You know, if you're Frank Lampard, and I've seen it, I've known this with managers in the past, big, well-known names, where clubs have come back to them and said, we'd like you to come in and fill in, but we're not going to employ you at the end of it. We're going to look for someone else. So how's Frank going to feel? So he's going to go in. Is there part of him that's thinking, right, it'll be great because it'll put me in the shop window as far as other clubs concerned?
And there are vacancies.
There are vacancies. Whether those will suit him, I don't know. But to go back to Chelsea as well, where, you know, there was the huge demise and then he was got rid of, to go back and be manager there, but only for a short space of time, how's that going to feel to your ego? Or is there part of him that's thinking, this time I'll get it right, and then maybe they'll give me the job at the end of it. But also he'll be paid a few quid for doing it as well. It is a strange one.
It is.
But when you think about it, it could make sense.
And it's kind of bittersweet for him. It's like, we want you back, but by the way, you're not good enough to be given the job full time. And also the Chelsea faithful weren't especially happy with him.
They weren't, but they do love him. There's no question about that. I think
he's a legend, isn't he?
He is. He's a Chelsea legend as a player, and you know, when you have that in the bank and you've got supporters behind you, even though it might not have worked out as a manager, they'd be thinking, you know what, he could come back and it can't be any worse than what we've just seen. So it's probably a good time for him to go in.
And you promised me fashion in the Masters.
Fashion in the Masters. Well, the Masters gets underway, the 87th Masters tournament in Augusta. And this is like no other golf tournament. There's no other golf tournament like it. I've just got a list of the rules, and you've got to behave yourself. It's like going back to 1948 if you go to the Masters. So they don't call them. If you call, they see all the support, all the fans around the outside. What would you call them?
Fans.
fans, spectators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you were working for the media and someone from the Masters, from Augusta National, heard you talk about the spectators, they'd say, Mr. Darbany, we would like you to leave now. Because I know Ellie wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't trust.
Yeah.
So, but they'd say they are patrons. You refer to them as patrons. Now, if you're a patron, no phones allowed, no running on the course, you get kicked off for this. You're not allowed to sit on the floor. Fold-up chairs, now, are always around the course. You know, you get the little fold-up chairs. Now, you leave your chair. If you get out there early, you put the chair down, and then maybe you walk away for 4 hours, nobody will sit on your chair, because if anybody is seen sitting in someone else's chair, they'll be out as well. Rules is rules. Can't wear caps backwards. And so there's all these different rules. But then the green jacket. Now, when we talk about the fashion, the legendary green jacket, which the winner gets and members of Augusta National will wear. Now, the green jacket goes right back to 1930 when Bobby Jones, legendary American golfer, came over to Hoylake in Liverpool and saw them wearing a red jacket and said, you know, when I go back, I want this to happen at Augusta. So that's what they've done. So when the winner, he gets handed the green jacket, and last year's winner will actually put the jacket on him, and they can wear it, but only for a year. They can wear it anywhere for a year, but after the year is up, it has to go back to the locker room at Augusta National, and that's the only place that they could wear it.
OK.
So,
Paul Coy, well, sadly, your time is up. We're going to put you back in the locker now.
Did I go on?
No,
I get passionate when I get onto Augusta.
When he gets onto fashion.
I have only just started,
not at all.
my friend.
Courtney, I've always been a big patron of yours.
Well,
thanks
thank
for
you
coming
very
in
much.
today.
That's very, very kind.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Coity. Now, stay with us. We'll be asking why over 45,000 burglaries in England aren't being attended to by police as we go through the papers with Andy Jones and Amy Cameron. That's next.
And you're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Martin and Ellie.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Breakfast. It's 8:37. Let's bring it to date now with all this morning's front pages.
And the Telegraph focuses on the police raid on Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Morell, who was arrested yesterday as part of an investigation into party donations.
And the Times leads with that shocking investigation into Tory MP Scott Benton, who has been suspended from the Conservative Party in a cash for access scandal over gambling this time.
The Sun go with argy-bargy as the facilities on Britain's first migrant floating hotel are revealed.
And The Guardian revealed the royal family took £1.2 billion in private income from their various estates last year.
Well, it's time to go through the papers in more detail now with writer and journalist Andy Jones and environmental campaigner Amy Cameron. Good morning to you both. Andy, let's go to you first. This is in The Times. Police failed to turn up to more than 45,000 burglaries in England. It's quite shocking, isn't it?
Absolutely astonishing. That's around 120 different burglaries a day that they failed to do and attend the scene personally and take statements. Everything's done over the phone. And there's a huge postcode lottery as well as to where the bobbies are going to turn up to investigate your burglary. Bedfordshire was absolutely the worst in terms of burglaries. 61% they didn't turn up to crime scenes to investigate a burglary. Thousands of cases were closed without even attending. Cambridgeshire, Surrey and Northumbria also polled particularly badly. Again, we're talking about trust in police, whether it's the Met Police and the scandalous things we've seen there. And ultimately, if you're burgled and the police don't even turn up to take a statement, you're not expecting the full force of the police to swoop into action to then go and catch the bad guys, but not even physically turning up to the door is astonishing. And again, we're talking about eroding trust in police impacts all sorts of things. If you've had police not turn up to a burglary at your house, are you then going to bother reporting other things that you see in the community? Policing is very much by consent in the UK in terms of taxes, etc., etc. And also, we saw the astonishing bravery of the woman last week attending giving key evidence in the Olivia Pratt-Corbell case. And you think, well, the public are going to astonishing lengths to try and help the police here, and yet the police aren't even turning up to burglaries. 45,000 last year failed to turn up and do crime scene investigation.
OK, Amy, bringing you in now. When you think that only 6% of burglaries ever get solved in the UK, that's a shockingly low amount, is this actually a question of policing priorities? 'Cause all the time this week we spoke to the Conservatives, the Labour Party, they both want 13,000 more bobbies on the beat, but the police just seem to be wasting time policing tweets and not the streets. You can bet if you use the wrong pronouns, they'd be around to your front door straight away.
I mean, that's wild speculation, Martin, but I think everyone can agree that policing is not working in the UK, right? Both exactly to Andy's point, that levels of trust and faith in the police have never been lower. And that's cumulative. That's coming off the back, as Andy's already said, of the Louise Casey report, which, I mean, I'm speaking as a woman who lives in London. My level of faith in the Met Police at this point is probably in the negative figures. You know, both from whether I think they'll turn up to something, but also whether I believe I'll be treated with respect and decency when they do. You know, and I think the issue of burglaries is such an interesting one, right? Because the police might sort of class that as a non-important crime. If your home is burgled, that is a horrifying experience to go through. It's a real violation, right? And I understand that support for the police in terms of financial support has been cut consistently over the Conservative government's terms. But I think there's clearly something going horribly wrong here. I don't know that just ploughing more people into the police is the only way to address this, because I think we also have to look at some of the driving factors around crime. You know, we know that inequality and poverty in the UK are at record highs, and I think you can't tackle one side of the problem without tackling the other. What is driving so many young people into crime? It's a lack of support services. It's a sense that they have no meaningful way to advance in their lives. It's the prevalence of gangs.
Well, is it just that, or is it a lack of respect for law and order?
Of course it is. And also, how often is burglary a gateway crime into even worse things? How often do we cover stories on this very programme where a guy has got a list as long as your arm, and it started with shoplifting, burglary, and eventually sort of really violent crimes like murder,
gateway
sex
crime.
offences? Exactly. And if somebody's getting away with burglary, as you said, going into people's home, stealing stuff, and it's not even investigated, they're not even feeling the police's breath on their collar, let alone being stuck in court. And then they go on and do something else, attacking people in broad daylight. We see horrendous violent crime in this country, and very often it starts with burglary.
No,
and
I
I'm
don't.
not sure removal of youth services, etc., is absolutely pivotal. So.
Yeah,
I think you can do both, though, right? I think that's the thing. I don't think anyone thinks we should be decriminalising burglary. Clearly not. But I think we do have to look at what drives young people into the hands of existing criminals or existing criminal networks. And often that's because they've been left behind. They're in areas where there's no opportunity. There's a lack of funding in support services for children.
A huge amount of burglaries are actually driven by drug addiction and drug use. And I wonder, both you guys, quickly, if a more sensible solution to this might be something more like Canada or Portugal. So rather than criminalising burglary, medicalising drug use, but that's a separate topic. That'll take us too long. Let's move on. Amy, back to you. We're trying to get the story in all morning against a ban on wild camping.
Yeah, so I'm interested in this story. It's been rumbling for a little while, and you see it in a couple of the papers. In the Times, it's also in the Guardian, which is about you might remember there was a court case taken tail end of last year, I believe, by a landowner by the name of Alexander Darwall, who bought 1,620 hectares of the Dartmoor National Park.
Yep.
And he then took the Dartmoor National Park Authority to court to challenge the right for people to wild camp on his land, and de facto then right across Dartmoor, because
wild
the ruling
camping being off campsites just any way you fancy.
Exactly, and always done under a leave no trace, a kind of understanding. So this is people who go, they camp freely, and then they kind of they clear up after themselves and they leave. What's happened now is that the Dartmoor Park Authority have had their application to appeal approved. The reason I think this is important is actually related to the royal story. There is something super weird happening in the UK in terms of private ownership of land.
Yeah.
And the access that we as citizens then have to that land. And I think a lot of this happens out of sight, out of mind. You take something like the Dartmoor National Park, people rightly see that as a national treasure. And as a national treasure, it should be freely available to the public. We know after lockdown how important access to green space was, getting kids out into nature, how good that is for our mental health and our physical health. And I don't think it should be at the whim of hedge fund managers to deny people access to enjoy British countryside. So I think this is actually a super important story, and I really hope that they are successful in overturning this, because there is such little access to land in England.
Yep.
And I think you see that in terms of our disconnection from nature.
And it's such a wonderful thing in Scotland, isn't it, to be able to go wild camping? I mean, I've had many friends who've really enjoyed their time up there, so it would be good to see it in more areas in England. Right, Andy, let's go to something completely different with you now in The Sun. And we were talking earlier, we touched upon, didn't we, the dangerous addicted to gambling and how often it can end in tragedy and ending in suicide. And this is something that's hoping to tackle that. And this is gamblers under 25 to be banned from betting more than £2 per online spin. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so as someone who likes to bet myself, we're already seeing sort of affordability checks come into gambling. If you open a betting account, you have to supply all sorts of things from bank statements and things to make sure you can afford it. One of the latest ruses that the government is potentially looking at is under 25s being limited to £2 per spin on these sort of online gaming machines, online gambling machines, online casino. Yes, if you're a gambling addict, that may or may not stop you. Two, you can probably open many, many different accounts anyway, or find different ways of doing it. I'd also say limiting, under 25 as well. I mean, telling a 24-year-old who may earn a fairly decent salary, but they can't pay more than £2 an online spin seemed a little bit draconian to me. Also, you know, you can walk into any city centre, particularly in the south of England, and be charged £7.50 a pint or something. So, and then £2 on an online spin. I mean, where are you spending your money? Also, this taps into the Scott Benson thing earlier, the MP for Blackpool, who got collared, saying he was going to sort of represent gambling companies and try and spy on what the government is doing if they paid him a few quid. The government trying to be tough on gambling, but it's a very, very difficult thing to police, because whether it's age or affordability, anybody can get trapped into gambling spirals. But £2 a spin seems rather restrictive to me.
I wonder if part of the problem with this, Amy, is that, particularly in football, but also in terms of the money to the treasury, gambling is a huge source of revenue now to the government. So are they actually wanting to stop gambling, or is this just like a bit of a token thing, or just cut it down a bit, lads, but actually just keep giving you money?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, not least because, as the Scott Benton story points to, the gambling industry lavish huge sums of monies on MPs to keep them sweet, you know, and that's kind of hospitality things, taking them to races, having private boxes for them, hosting fancy lunches, because the gambling industry know that the tide of public opinion is turning against them. The extent of online gambling that exists, how easily accessible that is, and how much it has destroyed lives. You know, people have lost their lives over gambling.
It's also
addiction.
quite good fun. I mean, I do like a little flutter myself.
Of course.
It's not all bad.
No.
You know, let's not put the boot in too much.
I think that's true. I mean, and you know, I'll put a bet on a big sporting event. It adds like an extra bit of excitement, right? But that's not really what we're talking about here. When you're talking about online, effectively, it's online one-armed bandits, isn't it? You know, it's pointless.
You can play them 24 hours a day as well. If you're at a race meeting, you have a bet every half an hour for each race. The other thing I'd say is, what is the government doing about betting shops on the high street? I mean, my high street, I don't know about you, is basically 5 betting shops, a couple of charity shops and a Greggs. And I'm a bit like, betting shops are so everywhere, and you just get people wandering in, especially in the heating crisis, to keep warm, sit there, spending however much money, getting addicted, and yet sort of this online behaviour, I feel it's a little bit tokenistic.
OK, that's great on the papers. But before you go, let's start with you, Amy. It's DIY disaster weekend. Any plans to sort of get your hammer and drill out this weekend?
Absolutely not. It will. I don't know if it would be surprising to you or not that I am completely useless at DIY.
I failed to grasp that.
Like, I'm all right at basic tasks, like I can restart the boiler, and that's about the extent. That's about
better than me. Andy, what about you?
I'm doing a little place at the moment. When I say little, it really is. I mean, it sounds very grand saying that, but I'm doing somewhere else. And I really enjoy it. I'm absolutely hopeless at anything involving electrics or
well, that's
plumbing.
fair enough. Get the praise in for that.
But we all sit looking at screens these days, and I find it actually quite therapeutic, doing a bit of painting, bit of scraping, bit of whatever.
I'm too much
with
of a
the test match
perfectionist.
on. GB News, whichever. And just losing yourself for a little bit, and also getting out of the city. My word.
Superb. There we go. Handy Andy Jones. Thank you very much for coming in today, and also, of course, Amy Cameron's been a superb newspaper review. Thanks.
Yes,
to both of you.
thank you both so much. Well, the reason we're talking about that is because many of us over the Easter Bank Holiday weekend are going to be engaging in a spot of DIY. It's the most popular weekend of the year to do so, apparently. And according to new research, around half of us are going to be getting the toolbox out this weekend. So we're going to talk now to DIY expert Jo Bahari for her top tips on how to stay safe, because if we don't want to be going to A&E. I was about to say we are going to A&E. We don't want to be going to A&E, Jo. So tell us, what is the safest DIY that we can be engaging in this weekend?
Yeah, it is a great weekend for doing DIY projects, especially big, long projects, rooms that you want to decorate. But it is also a very busy weekend at A&E for DIY injuries. So I would say make sure you start early in the day. Do your research, look at online videos, and make sure you understand what the pitfalls of the job are before you start. And another way that people tend to injure themselves, or DIY tends to go wrong, is by using the wrong tools. So make sure you're using the right tools for the job rather than making do with something that isn't going to work. And sharp tools are really important as well. A lot of people get injured by using blunt chisels or blunt saws. That's when people tend to slip, and that's when they cut themselves. And it's actually better to use a sharper tool than a blunt tool. Another thing that I think is Another thing that's really important is working at height. If you are working up a ladder or if you're doing anything on the ceiling or upstairs, make sure you tell somebody, or if somebody else isn't in the house, make sure you phone somebody and said, I'm going to be working at height. I'll check in later, because a lot of injuries happen when people fall and they don't have the help that they need in order to help them get up from that fall. So make sure if you're working at height, you've got somebody around, or you've checked in with somebody just in case you do have an accident. It's really important to use a step ladder, a proper ladder, a working platform, or even if you're working outdoors at height, to hire a platform rather than to balance on a chair or a stool that isn't fit for purpose.
Yeah, I mean, that ladder advice is so key. I've got a ladder that goes right to the top of my house, got 3 stories up there, and my missus just gets really, really stressed because the ladder's really flex. Ladders are a big problem. I saw a funny stat, not funny stat, but ladders kill more than terrorists.
It's phenomenal how many people end up with serious injuries, let alone fatal injuries, from ladders. And actually, a lot of that is not balancing the ladder properly, but also carrying things up the ladder in your hands when you need your hands to work the ladder properly. So if you are taking a lot of tools with you, put them in a bucket or something, or a bag, even a rucksack, so that you can carry them up that ladder whilst using your hands to help you get up the ladder as well. Because a lot of people end up using their ladder with one hand and carrying tools with another, and that's when you can fall.
Yeah, really good advice there, Joe. I don't know if you just heard our newspaper reviewer, Andy Jones, there saying he actively avoids electrics and plumbing whilst he's doing up his house. Is that best to leave that sort of thing to the experts?
Oh, that was music to my ears. Well done, Andy. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely don't tackle electrics. Definitely don't tackle any gas work. Those 2 areas are, if they go wrong, they're fatal. And it is actually also illegal to do those things. There are reasons that there are qualified professionals to do those jobs. So electrics, gas, plumbing, and I would say if you're not very confident, then don't tackle any water plumbing either, because if that goes wrong, it can create a lot of damage. So make sure you use the experts for the jobs that you really aren't very confident in, or that if they go wrong, it's going to cost a lot of money and cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Because part of the problem, especially with us blokes, is we don't like to admit our limits. Now, let's have a go at the electrics. Let's have a go at the gas. Let's have a go at the water, and then it's like crash, bang, wallop. You got a flood, or you're flying across the room. And I've done that a few times myself. So great advice. Know your limits. Call a professional. Because a friend of mine is a builder. He said most of his work is putting right the disastrous work of the bodged DIYers at home.
And I'd say on that point, know when to stop. If it's not going well, stop. Don't keep going, and then call the experts in. Even blame somebody else if you're too embarrassed to admit that you've got it wrong.
Superb. Great.
Sometimes a challenge when it comes to men, hey, Joe. But thank you very much for your DIY advice. It sounds like we all need it around here. And lots of people are going to be doing it this weekend, aren't they? So do let us know if you are engaging in some DIY this weekend. How are you feeling about it? Do you know when to stop when it all goes wrong? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But stay with us. Just after this break, we're going to have more on the arrest and release of Peter Murrell as Nicola Sturgeon pledges to fully cooperate with the investigation.
But first, here's your all-important weather forecast with Greg Dewhurst.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We'll see some heavy showers across the UK through the day ahead. There will be some sunny spells over the next few days, temperatures on the rise. So low pressure in charge of our weather at the moment, but this starts to slip away into Good Friday and the Easter weekend, and it allows high pressure to build and settle things down. Generally, however, weather fronts will try and move in, particularly as we get to Monday. So heavy showers already from the word go this morning across northern parts of England, across into Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, generally dry start with some sunny spells. But as we move through the day, increasing risk of some heavy thundery showers across parts of Wales, the Midlands, central southern England. Elsewhere, we'll generally see sunny spells. Rain holding on though across Shetland and Orkney as we move into the afternoon. In any sunny spells, we should see highs of around 15 or 16 Celsius, so feeling a little warmer than it did on Wednesday. Into the evening time, we could see those showers merge into some longer spells of rain, particularly down eastern parts of England. But elsewhere, we'll see clearing skies, and that will allow temperatures to drop away as we head overnight. Temperatures parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland falling close to, if not below freezing, leading to a patchy frost here, just holding up across the far southeast where we have thicker cloud and some patchy rain. So it means a chilly start to Friday morning, but plenty of blue skies, with the exception being just the east coast of England and also far northeast of Scotland. Here we could see some low cloud lingering through the day, perhaps thick enough for the odd spot of light rain or drizzle. So feeling quite cool here, but elsewhere in the sunshine into the afternoon, a warm feeling day, 16 or 17 Celsius in that sunshine, making it feel pretty pleasant for the time of year. This warm, dry weather holds on through Saturday and into Sunday. Plenty of sunshine, but it does turn cooler and more unsettled as we head into Easter Monday. Those temperatures just dropping a little to around average for the time of year.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion, 5 times the debate, and 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end. I can't Britain's wink. Listening.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nicola Sturgeon vows to fully cooperate with investigators after her husband faced 11 hours of questioning by police before he was released without charge.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock on Thursday, the 6th of April. This is Breakfast on GB News with Martin Daubney and Ellie Costello.
Here's what's leading the news this morning.
Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, has been released pending further investigation into the SNP's finances after a day of questioning. A spokesperson for the former First Minister said she had no prior knowledge of the police's plans to arrest her husband.
The Prime Minister has defended the move to house migrants in a barge off the coast of Dorset, calling the proposal fair. The Transport Minister, Richard Holden, told us it was about dissuading people from crossing the Channel.
What we want to do is tackle that backlog, stop people crossing the Channel, stop providing some of those pull factors, and I'm really glad that this is one of the Prime Minister's top 5 priorities, is tackling the small boats, stopping the boats, and I think this is a really important step in that direction.
And nearly 100 Metropolitan Police officers have been moved from tackling serious crime to instead investigate wrongdoing within their own force. In a letter to the Home Secretary, Commissioner Mark Rowley said there were hundreds of officers who shouldn't even be there.
And the Port of Dover will build temporary marquees to check passports as it moves to avoid another weekend of travel chaos. It comes as drivers are warned to expect delays from today as 17 million cars hit the road over the Easter weekend.
And you can join in any of our discussions today in the usual way by emailing gbviews at gbnews.uk or, of course, tweet us at gbnews.
To our top story now, and the former chief executive of the SNP and husband of Nicola Sturgeon, Peter Murrell, has been released without charge after being detained for 11 hours by police.
And Sturgeon has pledged to fully cooperate with investigators following the arrest yesterday morning, which saw officers seen taping off and searching the couple's Glasgow home and even their garden.
Let's go to Glasgow now, where we can speak to our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, you've been there all of yesterday and you will continue to be outside that house today. What is the latest?
Well, the latest actually over the last hour, we know that former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was supposed to speak at a climate talk today with Ambassador Patricia Espinosa, who had travelled from Mexico, that to be held at Dynamic Earth in Edinburgh. Now we know following a statement from the former First Minister's people, that she has made the difficult decision not to participate this evening. She's grateful to the festival, the Ambassador and Mary McCallan, the new Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Just Transition, clearly stepping down so that the focus of today's climate change talks remain on the subject at hand and not the ongoing investigation. Certainly here, still quite a large police presence outside the home of Peter Murrell and Nicola Sturgeon. Peter Murrell arrested early yesterday morning. Police arrived here at 7:30, and then over the course of the day we learned that he had been arrested in connection to funding and financing of the SNP. Now, that really stretches back quite far over the last 5 years. From about 2017, the SNP had fundraised about more than £660,000, and following several complaints, criminal complaints, from some donators that how that money was getting spent. Now, we know that a further £100,000 was paid as a loan from Mr Murrell to the SNP, and all this together was under some quite intense scrutiny from Police Scotland and what we know now as Operation Branch Form. Not just here in Glasgow, but also in Edinburgh. SNP HQ was hit really quite strongly by a lot of police yesterday, and certainly this story is still going to develop in the days and weeks ahead. Not a great start for Humza Yousaf in his first full week as Scotland's new First Minister.
OK, Tony Maguire, thank you for bringing us the latest there outside Nicola Sturgeon and Peter Murrell's house, and you'll continue to be there for GB News across the day.
And joining us now in the studio is the former Liberal Democrat Minister, Norman Baker. Norman, an absolute car crash north of the border. What do you think this means for the future of the SNP and indeed independence?
Well, they're already in some difficulty because Nicola Sturgeon held the party together successfully over many years. And the only thing that SNP members have in common is a wish for independence. Other than that, they are widely varying in their opinions about a whole range of issues, and she clamped them together. And when she went, the clamp was released, and we then saw, you know, a really quite unfortunate leadership contest with all sorts of stuff coming out. We've seen Hamza Yusuf being successful in that, but I mean, he looks to me like he's not the same calibre as Nicola Sturgeon. And now, of course, this wouldn't have happened. We don't know what the ins and outs are, but the police wouldn't have taken this drastic action without some pretty strong evidence, I suspect. I think it means the SNP is falling apart, to be honest with you, and therefore, whether you were in favour or against independence, I think the case has been set back several years.
Well, Norman, stay with us. I wanted to get your reaction to this next story, because earlier we spoke to Richard Holden about Scott Benton, the Tory MP, who's offered to lobby on behalf of the betting industry in return for payments. We asked Richard Holden about that, and this is what he said.
I think it's quite right that it's been referred to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. The government toughened the rules not that long ago to say that people couldn't do paid lobbying for companies. And furthermore, he's also, the Chief Whip, suspended the whip from Mr Benton yesterday. And one of the things we've been putting pressure on over the last few years is for a proper review of the 2005 Gambling Act, which was passed by the last Labour government, because one of the things which wasn't looked at or really understood at the time was issues around online gambling. This one is very serious, and that's why the party has moved very swiftly to suspend the whip, and also has been referred to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. I think that's exactly what was the right thing to do.
That's Richard Holden speaking to us on Breakfast earlier. So, Norman, what do you make of this? It's very serious, isn't it?
It's very serious, and the issue of cash for questions is not new. This occurred in the John Major years back in the 1990s. It's well established all the way through my parliamentary career that you cannot take money to ask questions. You really can't do that. And this is even more serious here for two reasons. First of all, that he is, Scott Benton is chair of the all-party group to do with gambling, so he's put himself in that position. All-party groups need looking at, as a matter of fact. It's the last vestige of problems in Parliament, in my view. But beyond that, he's actually offered, as I understand it from the Times, to give the gambling industry foresight of a paper to be published in 48 hours before it's actually out. Now, you can never release select committee reports in advance. That's just out of order. But to do so to the gambling industry about gambling proposals potentially looks to me like the equivalent of insider trading.
Yeah. So Blackpool South, Benton's constituency, is only very recently a Tory constituency, a classic Brexit seat. It's got to be under fire by Labour. He's had the whip withdrawn. Do you think this could lead to a withdrawal petition and maybe even a by-election?
Well, it could well do, but I have to say this is a latest succession of sleaze incidents associated with the Conservative Party. And what you find out when a party's been in power for a very long time. We saw it with the Conservatives in 1996-97. We saw it with Labour to some degree at the end of their time in 2010. When you've had a party in power for a long period of time, then they get sloppy, they get sleazy. And I think the public have had enough of it.
OK, Norman, stay with us. I wanted to show a clip from Richard Holden, our interview with him earlier. We also asked him about Rishi Sunak's new plan to house migrants on a barge off the coast of Dorset. Let's have a listen to what Richard Holden had to say about that plan.
Well, I think what we need to do is try and tackle the asylum backlog as quickly as we can. And this is, I think, the first step in that direction. I hope we see more of these across the country, and also the use of some of those military bases as well. I think what we want to do is tackle that backlog, stop people crossing the channel, stop providing some of those pull factors, and I'm really glad that this is one of the Prime Minister's top 5 priorities, is tackling the small boats, stopping the boats, and I think this is a really important step in that direction.
Well, Richard Holden says it's an important step in the right direction, but the facts are just 500 migrants on this barge, not even 0.5% of the backlog of illegal migrants that we're dealing with.
No, it looks to me like a rather desperate effort to get some headlines which imply the government's doing something sensible about the problem. The reality is that it's better, I think, actually to hold people in one location than in various hotels across the country. So to that extent, I agree with the government's intentions. But the reality is that some of these barges or or indeed the North Eye prison near Bexhill, which is another suggestion, are in really, really poor condition, and they're going to have quite a lot of money spent on them to become habitable for anybody. So that's another problem which is going to cost money down there. But the other thing is that we've seen, of course, as we all know, an explosion in the number of people coming across the Channel, and it's got worse, Martin, I have to say, since Brexit, because now we haven't got the capacity, which we had before, to return people to other European Union countries, to just say no now. So people are now flocking in, and there's no way of dealing with them, apparently, and this is a sticking plaster which won't hold for very long.
But there is a similar chaos in Ireland, a European member state. Anyway, let's not get into Brexit right now. Stay with us. We'll come back to you shortly for more reaction on some stories shortly. OK, thank you. The King is to attend his first Royal Maundy service this morning.
Also known as Holy Thursday, it occurs every year on the Thursday before Easter Sunday and is marked in the UK by the handing out of small silver coins known as Maundy money.
And another tradition of the ceremony is for the monarch to carry a small bouquet known as a nosegay. And for the last 40 years, one Leicestershire florist has had the honour of preparing it. Our Will Hollis went to meet her.
For centuries, the King or Queen has handed out money on Maundy Thursday. Another part of the tradition, the nosegay, a sweet-scented bouquet of flowers to hold. Since 1984, Rosemary Mason has made them for Queen Elizabeth and now King Charles.
It's an honour to continue and to be able to, say, continue in history, because it's a transfer, isn't it? And having done it for so long for the Queen, it's you're going into the next generation.
This year, the Maundy service is at York. It's King Charles's first as monarch. Last year, he attended on behalf of his mother, so he knows Rosemary's handiwork.
The King was the Prince of Wales and the Queen was the Duchess of Cornwall. And we talked in great length about the nosegays, what were in them. And so last year, the transition from that to this year, from monarch to monarch, is one of extreme pride.
It takes months to get the nosegays ready. Rosemary says it's been a great honour to do it for so long for the late Queen. Last July, Rosemary had an accident. While in hospital, she received a letter from Queen Elizabeth.
It was to say I hoped I would have a quick recovery, and also thanking me for over the last 20 years for doing the nosegays. And that was 10 days before she passed away. And that meant such a lot to me, that letter. For somebody who, she must have been, knowing that she wasn't well.
Since 2008, Rosemary has held a royal warrant as supplier of nosegays. With the passing of the Queen, all warrants in her name must be renewed, including Rosemary's.
I would want to continue and serve the King as I have done the Queen for the Maundy services and supply the nosegays. That's what I would like to do, but it's not in my hands.
Charles will give out silver coins worth 74 pence to pensioners as part of Maundy. Rosemary says seeing the King holding her nosegay is her prize. Will Hollis, GB News in Leicestershire.
Thank you to Will Hollis for that report. Norman Baker is still with us in the studio. So the first Maundy Thursday service for King Charles as monarch. It's significant, isn't it?
And the first time I've heard the word nosegay for about 50 years, I think.
Can't be a good nosegay.
The amount of money handed out is based on the length of the monarch's reign. And therefore, there's virtually nothing handed out this year because Charles just got there. There's been quite a lot handed out when Queen Elizabeth was coming towards the end of her reign.
Kind of austerity Maundy.
But let's stick with the theme of money when it comes to King Charles, because there's an investigation on the front page of The Guardian today that shows King Charles and the late Queen's fortunes grew 16-fold during Queen Elizabeth II's reign, taking £1.2 billion in private income from estates. Tell us a bit more about this.
Yes, Duchy of Lancaster and Duchy of Cornwall. As I set out in my book, actually, on the royal family, these duchies were not handed over to the public purse in 1760 when the rest of the royal lands were, the crown lands were, because they were valueless in 1760. The return from the Duchy of Lancaster in 1760 was less than £20 for the whole year. So they were not regarded as important enough to include in that deal. But the reality is now they are hugely valuable property companies, and they are developing huge sums of money. For example, the Duchy of Cornwall and the Duchy of Lancaster benefit from investment in wind power and the expansion of windmills across the country when they happen to be on duchy land. And of course, the Crown Estates also benefit from that, which goes back to the royal family as well. The reality is that the amount of money going to the royal family has increased enormously in the last 10 years. The civil list in 2011 was 7.9 million. The sovereign grant last year was 85 million. That's how much has gone up. And I think that for all the scandals about Andrew and about Harry and Meghan and everything else, the real scandal of the royal family, which the Guardian is picking up now, is money. That's where they're most vulnerable.
Yeah, well, the Guardian hates the royal family, shocker. Anyway, Norman Baker, thank you for joining us on that this morning. OK, so next, To The Point is coming up at 9:30. Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner are here, as usual, to tell us all about it. So, guys, what's coming up in today's excellent show?
Well, more on Nicola Sturgeon, for sure.
Yep.
She's pulled out of that big speech tonight. Funny, that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, we're going to be talking about that, aren't we? I'm a bit confused as to why they've got all the tents outside the house, as though someone's under the front garden.
It's like a scene from Line of Duty.
It really is.
So, I mean, when I first I thought, is there a body buried under the patio?
Exactly.
But they have taken lots of stuff away from the house. So obviously we're limited what we can say because it's an ongoing investigation. But it is an extraordinary thing involving. She was First Minister until a week ago.
Yeah. So, as well as the SMP car crash north of the border. What else have we got on the show today, guys?
We've got Carol Malone and Joanna Williams in the studio with us today to go through some stories in the paper. We've got Liam Halligan. It's the 6th of April. New tax year starts today. I'm sure we're all terribly excited about the concept of the 6th of April. So finding out what's happening in the economy, what does it mean for the money in our pocket. It's Thursday before Bank Holiday weekend. We're going to look at the travel situation.
Yeah. And a good take on this Tory MP on the front of the Times, Scott Benton, who was offering, it seems to me, very dubious to help gambling companies with money. We're talking to our very own Philip Davis, who the same sting operation was performed on him. He told him to sling the hook.
Because, of course, he's involved in the same committee, but, of course, he kept his nose clean. Good for him.
Good for him.
Yeah,
so
great
that would be
stuff.
quite an interesting take.
Yeah, it will be. Andrew, Beth, thank you very much. Looking forward to that. Now, stay with us. We'll be getting more from Norman Baker, his take on the Easter travel getaway next.
And this is Breakfast on GB News with Martin and Ellie.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen. Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion, 5 times the debate, and 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end. I can't Britain's wink. Listening.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. This is Breakfast. The time is 9:21. Now, around 17 million people are expected to hit the roads this weekend for Easter getaways, with rails especially expected to struggle with high capacity.
A former Shadow Transport Secretary, Norman Baker, is here with us. Let's analyse some of the chaos. Let's start at the port. So we had absolute chaos last weekend. They're promising things won't be as bad this time around.
Well, I think they'll still be pretty bad because the reality is that people have to get out of their coaches now and get their passports individually stamped. It never used to happen in the old days. So that's going to slow everything up. And no matter how efficient Dover is, that's going to be a reality. And of course, at the weekend, this is one of the top weekends for travel through Dover as it is everywhere else.
Yeah, they promised to put more tents in, more people in, so more physical ability to check. Why didn't they do that before?
Well, I don't know, but I felt sorry last weekend for kids stuck 12 hours in the coach with apparently a Mars bar or something and nothing else to eat, and the teacher trying to hold them together in that situation. Ghastly situation.
Yeah, it really was. Let's hope we don't see scenes like that this weekend. Let's talk about the planes, shall we? Because it's not looking too good at Heathrow.
No, it's not looking too good at Heathrow, and it's not helped by the fact that there's a shortage of staff and the strikes coming up, of course, or happening as well. And in fact, there's a poll, I think, in one of the papers suggesting quite a lot of people who work at Heathrow on processing people are thinking of leaving. So it's going to get worse probably at Heathrow rather than better.
Well, they should get Border Force back in, because when they came in, things were even better than when it was sort of get the army in. They were even better than Border Force.
I would say go to New Haven Dieppe Ferry in my part of the world, because that's not got queues and it works properly.
OK. And finally, your passion. Trains.
Yes, I just love trains. What a civilised way to travel. You can wander up and down.
Norman,
when they run. Well, the strikes are now out of the way, thank goodness. So we're now back to some sort of normality. And what we've seen post-COVID is that leisure travel has recovered more than 100% of what it was. So the people are now going leisure travel on train big time. Commuter travel is still down, but leisure travel's up. And I think the idea of getting in a train, wandering around, having a cup of tea, looking at the landscape as you go by, what could be better? And indeed, in my capacity as Director of External Affairs at Campaign for Better Transport, we've put a film together to promote rail travel, which we're releasing today.
Let's have a quick look.
Wouldn't it be nice if travelling was a pleasure rather than an endurance test? There has to be a better way. And there is. Train travel. On the train, we can get from A to B in comfort, with time to read, make calls, or grab a bite to eat. And taking the train helps tackle air pollution and climate change too.
But it looks beautiful.
Fantastic. And in fact, some of the nice bits of the film. I weren't shown there, obviously, but there were some lovely shots in Scotland and some of the rail lines up there. Jenny Agutter was the person who was voicing that, who, of course, was in The Railway Children. So I think when people have a look at that film, which is online at the Camping Bit of Transport, they'll think, I want to go by train this year.
Yeah, there are some beautiful stretches, aren't there, of railway in the United Kingdom?
Oh, well, fantastic. And one or two of the lines in the northwest of Scotland, in particular, out to Woburn, Carl of Lochharsh, also some of the Welsh lines are really, really beautiful. But even the line in my part of the world from Lewis to Seaford's lovely. It's a lovely way to travel.
Well, I haven't booked my ticket. I'm meant to be getting the train back to the West Country on Saturday. I've been told off repeatedly. I think the first thing I'm going to do after the show, Ellie, is book my ticket. Norman Baker, fantastic video. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. Have a great Easter.
Thank you. Same to you.
Norman. Yes. And good luck to you if you are heading out on plane, trains and automobiles this weekend. That's it from us this morning. Thank you for your company all of this week. We've got Andrew and Bev. They're going to be here just very shortly at 9:30 with To The Point.
Good morning, good morning. We're talking about trains. I will tell you about my journey in this morning.
Yeah, because they're expensive and they don't work and they're dirty.
Eye-wateringly expensive. We're going to be talking about that, and also we've got this interesting story, front page of the Times today, about the MP that was caught in a sting, and it relates to one of our very own presenters, doesn't it?
Yeah, who didn't fall for the sting. Also, Nicola Sturgeon, the crisis in the SNP intensifies. She's pulled out of a major speech tonight. I wonder why.
Yeah. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio